Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Joint Interim Standing Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Would our committee staff please take the roll?
Senator Buck. Senator Nguyen.
Here. Here.
Senator Doñate. Assemblymember Carter.
Present.
Assemblymember Karras. Assemblymember Kasama.
Here.
Assemblymember Patchett.
Here.
Chair Watts.
And I'm here. Thank you. We do have a quorum present. Just a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. If you would like to speak, please be sure to sign in at the table in the back. We will have two public comment periods today, one at the beginning of our meeting and one at the end. You may also provide public comment by phone. You can find the information for calling in on our agenda, which is also posted on the Nevada Legislature's website, along with all of our exhibits for this meeting. We will be limiting public comment to 2 minutes. So if you would like to provide additional comment, you can do so in writing. You can submit written public comment before, during, or after our meeting. And we do have the information on how to submit that on our agenda and on our website as well. We will be hearing several presentations today related to the needs for and options to get resources for funding for our transportation systems, including our roadways and public transit. So we will move to our second item on our agenda today, which is public comment. If anyone would like to provide public comment, please come forward to the chairs here in Las Vegas. Also up in Carson City. We'll start in Las Vegas, then we will go to Carson City. If anyone would like to provide comment there, then we'll go to the phone lines. And I see we have 3 people here. Once you finish, you can go ahead and return to your seat, and anyone else who wants to make public comment, just come on up until we run out of people who are interested. So good morning, welcome to the committee. Whoever would like to go first.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alexis Motorex, representing the Nevada Chapter Associated General Contractors. We sincerely appreciate the continued focus on the Highway Fund. Seeing this item on today's agenda is encouraging, as securing a sustainable transportation funding structure has been a priority to EGCs for nearly 3 decades. Our goal has always been clear: to identify an equitable and sustainable revenue source for the Highway Fund that keeps pace with inflation, evolving vehicle technology, and Nevada's continued growth. The reality is that the Highway Fund is approaching a fiscal cliff unless we make meaningful changes to how we fund our roads and highways. Nevada has not increased its gas tax since 1992. In that time, vehicles have become significantly more fuel efficient. Nevadans are driving more, and we've not incorporated the rapidly growing number of zero-emission vehicles into the funding structure. The purchasing power of those dollars has eroded dramatically, while the construction costs have steadily increased. While new and inclusive revenue mechanisms are necessary, we must also examine how existing Highway Fund dollars are being used. In 2023 alone, more than $44 million was diverted from the Highway Fund to augment other agency budgets. Since 2015, the DMV has repeatedly requested and received an increase in its statutory cap from 22% to 27% of the Highway Fund revenues. That increase represents roughly $240 million. In addition to that, the Highway Fund has contributed another $100 million toward the DMV system modernization project, which has now been underway for over a decade. Taken together, that's over $300 million that did not go toward road preservation, safety improvements, congestion relief, or well-paying construction jobs that strengthen Nevada's economy. We absolutely support continuing the conversation about generating sustainable and equitable new revenue, but increasing revenue without addressing structural diversions and long-term spending accountability will not solve the problem alone. As we consider new funding mechanisms and the possibility of asking Nevadans to pay more, we must ensure those dollars are protected, transparent, and used for their intended purpose, which is maintaining and improving the roads and highways we live by. Thank
Thank you. Good morning. For the record, my name is Ann Barnett, representing the Nevada Contractors Association, comprised of general contractors, subcontractors, and construction professionals who build and maintain Nevada's roads, highways, and infrastructure. From the construction industry standpoint, the funding challenges are real. Our members are experiencing rising material costs, labor pressures, and project cost escalation firsthand. At the same time, traditional transportation revenues have not kept pace with inflation and system demand. When funding is inconsistent, projects are delayed, bid schedules are unpredictable, and workforce stability is affected. Predictable funding allows Nevada to build responsibly and remain economically competitive. We appreciate NDOT's leadership and look forward to the department outlining the state's transportation needs and funding challenges. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Watts and committee members. My name is Lamar Jones. I'm speaking on behalf of IBW Local 357. In 2025, the legislation passed AB 527, authorizing automatic traffic enforcement cameras on the school buses. We applaud the legislature for taking the action to keep the students safe. Following session, Clark County School District underwent public procurement process to select vendors and subcontractors to provide skilled labor and install cameras on the infrastructure. CCSD selected Vera Mobility. It was a good leader in this space. The contractor scheduled to be awarded CCSD board meeting last Thursday, February 26th, but it was removed from the agenda immediately prior to the meeting due to a massive PR and political campaign waged by the unsuccessful bidder, Bus Patrol. We are requesting that the committee send a letter to CCSD to move forward and award the bus stop arms contract to Vera Mobility. They're signatory subcontractors at the next board meeting on March 12th. Vera worked with IBW members, including the local women and small businesses. They took the time to understand the community and they crafted throughout the response. It is our understanding that the Bus Patrol has raised legal technical issues with legislation, issues that are fully vetted by the legislature. And the legislative records are very clear. AB 527 had Bus Patrol's full support. Yet they continue to do everything possible to prevent CCSD from awarding this contract. They are not concerned about the policies in the community or our student safety. They just don't want to lose. They would rather nobody carry out this project. We are here with the community and care about the safety and the readiness to move this process forward. Thank you very much.
Good morning, members of the committee. Were you able to get my notes? Can I have these distributed to you? I submitted them digitally already.
If you did not email them to our committee staff, then you can provide them afterwards and we will make sure to get them distributed. If you did send them into our committee staff, then they are going to be uploaded as part of our public record.
Okay, so you should have those.
Yes, so please just begin by stating and spelling your name, please.
Okay, I'm Michael Covington. I'm a Vegas resident, MICHAEL, COVINGTON. I drive the freeway every day. I see the same thing as you guys do. Trucks stacked bumper to bumper, idling, burning diesel while we crawl. It's not just annoying, it's expensive. The semis tear up the roads, heavy rigs do damage equal to thousands of cars. We're spending millions to patch potholes while goods sit in traffic late to shelves. What if we fix that? Put dedicated electrified rails next to the I-15 and the US 95, using the land we already own. One train hauls what 50 trucks do, burns a fraction of the fuel, keeps pavement intact, and passenger cars can be added later. Less cars on the road, fewer wrecks. And jobs? Don't fire the truckers, retrain them. Same pay, better hours, no road rage. The BNSF and UP already run here. Let's upgrade their tracks, not build new ones. It's not pie in the sky. Europe does this. China's doing it as well. We could save billions in road wear, cut emissions, and get our Amazon packages faster. So what I'm asking is, what's the timeline? When can we start planning corridors? And I'd love to hear from the DOT or the commissions, because right now we're just paying more for less. Thank you for your time.
Sorry. Good morning. My name is Kimberly Augenbaugh. I am here today as a wife who lost her husband on US 95, but I'm also here as a wife of a 21-year United States military veteran and 40 years dedicated to serving his country. My husband dedicated 40 years of his life to serving this country. He carried a top secret security clearance. He held knowledge, experience, and skills that simply can't be replaced. Even after retiring from the military, he continued working towards the mission of protecting our nation. That was who he was. Service didn't end just because a uniform came off. He survived deployments. He survived the demands of military life. He served honorably and came home only to lose his life on the Nevada highway after striking a wild burro. That should have never happened. US 95 is not a back road. It's a major corridor between Las Vegas and northern Nevada. It is heavily traveled every single day by commuters, families, truck drivers, and service members heading to and from Creech Air Force Base and the Nevada Test Range, including personnel connected to Creech Air Force Base and the Test Range. There are many men and women just like my husband who drive that road daily, people entrusted with national security, with sensitive intelligence, with protecting this country. They leave their homes before sunrise or return after dark. They ride motorcycles, they drive cars, they trust that the roads will get them home safely. But in certain stretches, there is little lighting, there is limited fencing, and wild burros wander onto the highway without warning. When you're in a car, you might have some protection. On a motorcycle, you don't. I am here because this is preventable. We need targeted barbed wire or appropriate wildlife fencing in high incident areas. We need better lighting and known crossing zones. We need coordination with the Nevada Department of Transportation and the Bureau of Land Management to address the burrell activity before another tragedy strikes. My husband was a father to 4 children, including our young 13-year-old daughter. He was a grandfather to 9. He lit up every room that he walked into. He was my safe place, my best friend, and my home. He gave 40 years to this country. He deserved to come home safely on the Nevada highways. And so do others that drive that road. Please do not wait for another folded flag. Do not wait for another widow to stand here where I am today. Let his life and his service to this country mean something beyond this loss. Make US 95 safer. Thank you.
Good morning, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ann Hansen, and I'm here today because some that we loved, David we called him Augie Augenbach, lost his life in a motorcycle accident involving a burro on the Clark County Highway. Augie was not being reckless. He was not being careless. He was actually doing under the speed limit. He was riding on the roads that thousands of residents travel every single day, and yet one unexpected animal in the dark changed everything. We're not here for blame. We are here for prevention. We know that Nye County has taken proactive steps to address similar concerns with lighting, fencing, and coordinated borough management, even with smaller budgets and fewer traveled roads. This shows us that this is important and the problem is solvable. Clark County has more funding, more traffic, more riders, more families depending on safe roads. We are simply asking that the safety become a priority in the same level of infrastructure and growth. We are respectfully asking that they improve the roadway lighting in those high-risk areas. Strategic fencing along known borough corridors, which this particular area has been known for boroughs. Increased coordination with wildlife management and humane roundups and relocation. We don't want to get rid of the boroughs. We just want them relocated off of the highways. Clear reporting of tracking and animal relocating from incidents to occur. These measures are not extreme, they are practical, they are preventable, and they will save lives. No family should have to stand where we are today. Across the United States, there's an estimated 1 million to 2 million vehicles with animal collisions occur each year, causing roughly 200 human deaths and 10,000s of injuries. Here in Nevada alone, we have over 500 reported collisions annually between vehicles and wild animals, costing more to the public than $19 million in crash cost, resulting in thousands of wildlife deaths. And they are true numbers that are likely higher because some incidents go unreported. And data shows that wildlife vehicle collisions, most involving deer and large animals, result in millions of dollars of property damage, injuries, and loss of life.
And if, ma'am, you could begin to wrap up your remarks.
Yes.
Thank you.
For motorcyclists, this is even more significant because they have not the protection of a car. Let's not let Augie's life be the reason for, let's let Augie's life be the reason for our change. We're not angry, we're just hope that together we can make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seeing nobody else coming forward down in Las Vegas, and seeing nobody coming forward in Carson City, we will go to the phone lines. AVH, would anyone like to provide public comment by phone?
Thank you, Chair. If you would like to participate in public comment, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good morning, Chair. Sorry for the background noise. I'm on a RTC Access bus. This is Dora Martinez, and good morning to you and Vice Chair and members of the hardworking committee. I saw the agenda and I was not able to read the Gwynn Center report due to its lack of full accessibility for people who are blind like myself. But I feel like I need to be here and voice out people who are blind and people who are disabled in Nevada who use RTC Access and St. Paratransit in the South. I don't know if you are all aware, but RTC is their survey out. It's called Top Move More with RTC, and it's asking the general public to see if a door-to-door service for people who are disabled, who are eligible and certified to use RTC Access needs to be continued to move forward. And I feel that that's not fair because public does not know the service that people with disability need. It's sort of the phrase that I use a lot, nothing about us without us. They failed to give that survey to people who are using paratransit. I'm talking to my peers and they have no clue. And I'm asking you and people who care enough to listen to please, let's not make that happen because we cannot go anywhere without the door-to-door service. People with disability who are blind and people who are wheelchair users need that service to be able to get off the bus and be pushed because they cannot, let's say, push themselves to the destination door. And so please, I hope that people with disability, if they don't know, go to the RTC Washoe and make your voice heard. And I appreciate everything you do, Chair, and I'm sorry if I'm going over my minute. And thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martinez. We always appreciate your participation and your advocacy. And you were just right at just over 2 minutes, so you did a good job. Yeah, thank you for your comments. AVH, next caller, please.
Chair, you have no more callers at this time.
All right. Before we move into our next item, I'll turn it over to Assemblymember Carter who has a comment.
Thank you, Chair Watts. I feel compelled to take and bring up an issue that was brought up here this morning that I've been watching since last Thursday. AB 527 came through Growth and Infrastructure in the regular session, and we heard how critical this was, and I agree on the bus light cameras. And now we see what on the surface appears to be a total corruption of the process, where we had a vendor come in, build relationships within the community, become the apparent low bidder, and then at the last minute get pulled off the agenda in the school board. And now it appears that there's a full frontal attack on everything to do with AB 527, including its necessity. And I just want to say that as a member of the legislature and as a Nevadan, we need to stop this horsing around, and this needs to be brought in front of the school board and dealt with appropriately, and not allow the actions and the work of our legislature to be played with like this is going on. And I appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll now move to item number 3 on our agenda. We are going to receive a joint presentation on the usage and need for state highway fund dollars. We have representatives joining us today from Nevada's Department of Transportation, Department of Motor Vehicles, and Department of Public Safety. We have presenters joining us both here in Las Vegas as well as up in Carson City. So welcome, Director, and your team, as well as Team DMV up north. Whenever you're ready, please proceed.
And Team DPS. So, good morning, Chair Watts and members. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you today. For the record, I am Tracy Larkin Thomason, Director for the Nevada Department of Transportation. Here next to me is Sandra Rosenberg, Deputy Director for the Nevada Department of Transportation. In the north, I have Christy Defer, who is Deputy Director for the Department of Public Safety, Tanya Laney, who is Director for the Department of Motor Vehicles, and Sean Seaver, who is Deputy Administrator for the Department of Motor Vehicles. There are 2 reasons why we chose to appear together today. First, our missions to provide safe, efficient infrastructure and services for Nevada are interconnected. Second, we share a critical and troubled source of funding, the State Highway Fund. Together today, we will outline our missions, describe our needs to effectively carry out our missions into the future, and present the funding outlook for addressing our needs. We hope to leave you with a better understanding of what we do, how we are funded, and how we are prioritizing our core missions. Transportation is fundamental to economic well-being and quality of life. Our mission is to provide access to safe, efficient, low-cost transportation for our residents to support day-to-day mobility for jobs, family, and recreation. A good transportation system also provides longer-term income mobility while attracting and retaining business investment and jobs in our state. Each of our departments contribute a distinct role to our collective mission. NDOT maintains, preserves, and improves the state highway system and statewide transportation assets. DPS, Highway Patrol, provides law enforcement, traffic, and incident response services to users of the state highway system. DMV provides driver and vehicle licensing, oversight of driver safety and education programs, and highway user fee collection. These functions work in harmony, and the employees across our 3 departments make it possible for us to deliver our missions 24/7. Complementary to our focus on providing public services, we also prioritize employee development and training so that we can sustain our mission for future generations. Delivering our missions resources that we invest in our assets, which includes our staff and our facilities, our technology, and our services. I will share with you more information about NDOT's needs, then I will invite my counterparts to share theirs. At NDOT, our needs correspond with our core responsibilities. Spanning these 3 categories is safety, which is a top priority across all the work we do. The first category is preservation and maintenance of the 5,400 centerline miles and over 1,000 bridges that make up the state highway system. This includes the fundamentals of managing a road system, reconstruction of obsolete and deficient pavements and bridges, paving and repaving services, snow removal, incident management, traffic management, lighting, signage, sweeping, landscaping, litter cleanup, and so much more. Recently, this category includes significant new cost items like addressing copper theft and removal and remediation of encampments and public rights-of-way. We know that if we neglect the fundamentals of preservation and maintenance, the problems grow exponentially costlier to address, usually at a factor of 4 to 6%. 4 to 6 times higher. The cost of our equipment, materials, facilities, and staff and contractors in the engineering and construction trades who do the work of preservation and maintenance is about $3 billion over the next decade, or roughly $300 million per year. This is just preservation. This is not new capacity. The second category is capital improvements. This category of investments is critical to safety and efficiently to accommodate our growing population, jobs, trade, and commerce. Examples of major capital improvements include widening roadways and adding passing lanes, building interchange to improve traffic flow, and improving roadway alignments to improve safety and efficiency. These projects are long-term investments, often in the hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. Following our One Nevada long-range plan, we work closely with our local and regional partners to prioritize which projects we will invest in and when, as resources allow. Our commitment is to make the best use of limited states and federal dollars. We estimate NDOT's share of capital needs over the next 10 years is between 10 and 14 billion, which equates to 1 and 1.4 billion per year. Finally, NDOT needs include a variety of other essential programs. This includes compensation for our support staff, our facilities, our equipment and supplies, costs we pay to our partner agencies for HR, IT, finance, and legal services, and pass-through funding for our local partners, such as rural transit operations. We estimate this category at approximately 250 to 350 million per year over the next decade. Looking backward, our needs have grown sharply. In 1993, the cost of a typical highway interchange was around 10 to 12 million. Today, a comparable investment is many tens of millions, in some cases exceeding 100 million. Part of the cost increase comes from inflation, construction materials, and labor costs more now than they did in 1992. But the complexity of work is also growing. We design more advanced interchanges to handle more traffic. We face costlier land acquisitions, and our facilities are closer to developed areas. We go through more sophisticated environmental reviews and permitting and so on. The sheer volume of demand for improvements is growing too. Since 1993, our state's population has more than doubled from 1.3 million to 3.3 million. Usage of our roads has grown at a similar rate from 12 to 30 billion annual miles traveled, 140% increase. Consumer prices have more than doubled, and highway construction unit prices have more than quadrupled, an increase of 310%. Looking ahead, we are optimistic about Nevada's future as an attractive place to live and do business. To maintain what we have and accommodate future growth, we estimate Nevada's needs over the next 10 years between 1.6 and 2 billion per year. As you'll see later, when the funding available does not match this need, we make difficult choices to prioritize our investments. I'll turn it over now to my colleagues to share more about their agency's need, and I believe DMV will be addressing you next.
Thank you, Tracy. Good morning, Chair Watts, Vice Chair Wynn, and committee members. My name is Tanya Laney, and I am the Director of the Nevada DMV. I also have our Legislative Liaison, Sean Sever, with me at the table, and my Deputy Administrator, Angela Smith, and other members of our leadership team in the audience. We wanted to thank you for the opportunity to present this important topic to you today on our future funding needs. DMV's mission and vision are to be a national leader in DMV services by providing efficient motor vehicle solutions for the identification, licensure, and protection of the Nevadans we serve. As the population of the state and costs of goods and services continue to rise, we have consistently faced the challenge of fulfilling our mission and vision while funding through highway fund appropriations grows more concerning. Nevada's rapid growth is increasing demand for DMV services, and we need the staff and technology to keep up. Investing in our workforce, modern systems, and essential operating costs allows us to reduce wait times, improve access, especially in rural areas, and protect our customer data. With stable funding, we can deliver faster and more reliable, more secure service for every Nevadan. Additional high priority needs for the agency are facility upgrades and expansion, modern accessible facilities to meet growing demand, cybersecurity and data protection, advanced measures to safeguard personal data, employee training and development, preparing our staff for new technologies and regulations, disaster recovery and business continuity, backup systems for emergencies, and under customer experience and enhancement, self-service kiosks, mobile apps, and multilingual support. Serving the population in Nevada. Over the last 15 years, Nevada's population has grown 21.54%, and we continue to be ranked in among the fastest growing states in the U.S. As the customer base has grown, DMV has strived to provide fast, efficient service, while the staff has only grown 3.63% in comparison to the population growth. The need for services to continue in already established service areas must be balanced with the request for service areas to be established in more rural communities. New service areas will allow DMV to be more accessible to underserved populations. However, the cost associated with this in terms of office space and increased staffing often is not an option within the limits of the Highway Fund and the DMV cap restrictions. Technology, investment, and innovation. As an alternative to expanding service areas, the DMV has pursued expanding online access to our services. However, this too comes with a significant cost. As you're aware, DMV has invested heavily in transforming our computer systems, including implementing a new software platform and transitioning the existing platform to the cloud rather than a physical mainframe. Even with the completion of the official transformation project, technological investment and innovation will remain a priority for DMV so that we can continue to expand our online service capability. Technology costs have seen an increase, which is expected to continue with an annual 10.5% increase through 2030 and beyond. Operating costs. Our cost increases are not limited to technology or expanding service areas. The standard operating costs for the DMV have grown approximately 212%, excluding the costs related to the DMV transformation effort in the last 20 years, while incoming revenue has only grown 85% in the same period. Increases in population also result in increases in incoming revenue. However, most established fees have not grown with the inflated costs of goods and services except for the governmental service tax, of which most is distributed to local governments and not the Highway Fund. Funding structure. DMV collects about $1.9 billion in revenue each year. Most of that funding goes to counties, school districts, and the Highway Fund. The DMV retains only about 6% of that for its operations. Our primary funding sources are highway funds, fees, cost allocations, and commissions. We receive a small amount of general funds limited to supporting automatic voter registration. The DMV also operates under a statutory cap on the amount of highway funds it can use. Historically, that cap was 22%. It was temporarily increased to 27% for the transformation effort, but it is scheduled to return to 22% in fiscal year 28. A review is underway to determine whether the 22% cap is sustainable. Although revenue has increased over time, it has not kept pace with the rising costs or project needs. Highway fund allocation growth has slowed, creating a widening gap between revenue and infrastructure demands, especially as DMV operating costs have increased by more than 200% over the same period. The gap is worsened by an outdated fee model and record high inflation in materials and services. These pressures show that the current funding structure cannot absorb escalating costs and risks limiting or degrading DMV services. Nevada's populations and service demands continue to grow faster than the funding is available. Without meaningful updates to our revenue and fee structures, the DMV will struggle to keep up with the expectations and maintain service levels. And I will now turn it over to our friends over at DPS.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Christy Defer, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Department of Public Safety. With me, I have my Senior Fiscal Officer, Jennifer Ramos. Unfortunately, Director Tagliati was not able to be here today. The Nevada Department of Public Safety, Nevada State Police, serves as the primary statewide law enforcement agency, coordinating with local, state, and federal partners to protect residents and the millions of visitors who travel Nevada's highways each year. Of our divisions, 6 receive highway fund support to varying degrees, and the Nevada Highway Patrol, NHP, is funded almost entirely by the Highway Fund. Contrary to common belief, NHP does not receive revenue from traffic citations. Fines are collected by local courts. The Highway Fund is what sustains patrol operations. Every day, troopers respond to serious crashes, remove impaired drivers, regulate commercial vehicles hauling hazardous materials, and assist stranded motorists in some of the most remote terrain in the country. Along with our growing population, traffic volumes, freight movements, and tourism have increased substantially. But the funding model supporting the highway safety has not grown at the same pace. Meanwhile, costs have changed dramatically. Deploying a single trooper today costs significantly more than it did 20 years ago. Patrol vehicles now include in-car video, digital reporting systems, advanced radios, and safety equipment that did not exist in the early 2000s. These tools improve transparency and officer safety, but they increase the cost of each unit. Fuel, fleet replacement, insurance, and maintenance have all risen. Personnel remain our most significant pressure point. Recruitment and retention are ongoing challenges. While recent legislative action helped narrow pay disparities, DPS still competes with local agencies offering higher compensation. We are not currently requesting additional sworn positions due to the existing vacancies. Instead, we are focusing on stabilizing the workforce and requesting non-sworn support positions to allow troopers to remain on patrol rather than behind desks. In rural Nevada, troopers often patrol hundreds of miles alone. When a serious crash occurs on a remote highway at 2 a.m., that trooper is the only immediate sworn responder. Rural incentive pay and overtime costs are necessary to maintain coverage in those areas. Beyond NHP, the training division, which is 51% highway fund supported, ensures officers receive comprehensive academy and in-service training. As public expectations and legal standards evolve, training requirements continue to grow. The investigation division, partially supported by Highway Fund, provides complex investigative services statewide and will seek additional investigator capacity in the next biennium to meet their increasing demand. Although DPS does not generate revenue directly for the Highway Fund, the safety of Nevada's highways depend on our ability to maintain patrol presence, training standards, and investigative capacity. As Nevada grows, the demand for highway safety grows with it. The question before us is whether the funding structure designed decades ago can continue to support the level of public safety Nevadans have come to expect today. For more about the Highway Fund, I will hand it back to Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Tracy Larkin-Thomason, Director for the Nevada Department of Transportation. I will now turn to the other side of the equation. Where does our funding come from? Today, we aim to impart a clear understanding of funding, past, present, and future. The State Highway Fund is the backbone of statewide transportation and traffic safety in Nevada. It is, in essence, a bank account. The two biggest sources of its dedicated income are state motor fuel taxes on gasoline and diesel and state motor vehicle fees, all collected by DMV. These dollars are deposited into the State Highway Fund, and according to our state Constitution, they can only be spent on the administration of highway taxes and fees and highway construction, maintenance, and repair. The state fuel tax rate was last increased in 1992, and the basic vehicle registration fee was last increased in 1991, respectively 34 and 35 years ago. The State Highway Fund also receives other important sources of state funding at the discretion of the legislature. The specific types and amounts of these additional funding sources have evolved over time. At present, they include three sources. First, in 2023, the legislature fully restored the state's share, which is 18% of the government service tax revenues to the State Highway Fund, up from the 75% in previous years. The local share of GST is dedicated to school districts and local governments. The legislative deposits revenues for DMV and DPS. This revenue comes primarily from DMV fines, commissions, and fees other than vehicle fees. The legislature directs certain other revenues to the State Highway Fund, such as the first $5 million collected every biennium from the Transportation Connections Fee, which is a tax on ride shares like Uber and Lyft, 60% of the 5-cent property tax imposed in Clark and Washoe counties for capital projects and other miscellaneous items. Unlike fuel taxes and vehicle fees, none of these other funding sources is constitutionally protected for highway purposes. Finally, the State Highway Fund serves as a deposit account for all of our federal highway reimbursements. Much of this federal funding, approximately $200 million a year, is passed through NDOT to local agency partners. Outside the State Highway Fund, the legislature can directly appropriate other revenue sources from outside the State Highway Fund. This is currently the case for the share of the budgets of DPS and DMV. In addition, the legislature has granted NDOT the ability to bond against highway fund revenues. While bond sales generate cash and can be an effective strategy for leveraging debt to deliver more capital projects at any given time, bonds require debt service, payments that must be managed against future needs and revenue expectations. The state highway funds pays for about $75 to $100 million per year in debt service. Travel demand and construction and unit costs combined have increased by a factor of nearly 10 since 1993. By contrast, state transportation user fees have increased only by a factor of about 2.4 since 1993. There are two reasons state user funding is not keeping pace. First, the state's dedicated share of user fees revenues is not indexed to inflation. For example, state fuel taxes per gallon have remained flat even as the cost of fuel and other costs of maintaining our transportation system and services have increased, which means that if you pay $1 for a gallon of gas or you pay $5 for a gallon of gas, the state highway tax is the same. Second, cars are growing more fuel efficient and with alternative fuels, which is reducing the amount of gasoline consumed per mile driven. This in turn reduces the amount contributed by users of Nevada roads. We started to see this impact last decade, and although fuel economy has recently leveled off, the fast adoption of electric and hybrid vehicles in the past several years is expected to increase and resume the dip on our fuel tax revenues. Looking ahead, we expect both these trends, inflation and reduced fuel consumption, to continue, further undermining the viability of the state highway fund. In summation, our needs reflect our ambition to sustain and grow our infrastructure and services so that we continue to facilitate commerce and mobility safely for Nevadans and visitors to our state, and so that our infrastructure can be a foundation for future economic growth. While we observe declining purchasing power in our funding sources, we recognize that Nevadans do contribute substantially to the infrastructure of the state. And so we are committed to delivering our message by making the most of what we have, guided by the principles you see here, like enhancing safety, preserving infrastructure, and optimizing mobility. We hope that this presentation has provided a better understanding of our mission, our needs to fulfill our mission, and how the State Highway Fund and its user fee revenues function as a critical but troubled source of funding. We appreciate your attention today and your support for the work we do to keep Nevada safe, moving, and connected. And again, I also want to thank our partners. We really did want to put it together is because we share that pie. Anyway, we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. I think it is particularly helpful. Many of these topics get discussed in the legislature's budget committees when we're in regular session. But again, we often discuss those agency by agency, department by department. So having a comprehensive overview and getting that information out to the policy committee, I think, is very beneficial. Members, any questions for our presenters? Okay, seeing none at this time, I do have a couple. So, I think just to tie this all together, what we're hearing is that there are needs for highway funds, not only for the roadway and capital projects that we all think of, but also for the ongoing maintenance, running our Department of Motor Vehicles, including upgrading our technology systems, as well as supporting our state police, our highway patrol officers. And what we're seeing is that for various reasons, the inputs to the highway fund, as well as some of these other sources that have been dedicated to support transportation, are just not keeping up with demand. So essentially, our choices to meet this are find ways to increase the amount of revenue that's going into the highway fund or that is dedicated to transportation. increase some of the other fees that are associated that are dedicated to transportation, or increase general fund revenue for some of these purposes to free up highway fund or transportation fund. Obviously, general fund dollars fund a lot of things in our state. So allocating more general fund comes at the cost of healthcare, education, public safety, which are about 90% of what our general fund dollars go to. So that's potentially the conflict of that if we're not bringing in additional revenue. And again, if we're giving additional highway fund revenue to the DMV on an ongoing basis, that just shrinks the amount of the pie for the Department of Transportation, Department of Public Safety. And is that fair? Essentially, that we have a pie that is not growing enough to meet the needs of the agencies, and that those are kind of the options that we have, and that if we're just shifting funding in any of the existing funding sources, that is going to come at a cost to some other agency or use.
Again, Tracy Larkin Thomason for the record. You are correct. In 1992, when the actual rate was established, the highway fund was established in the current rates, it was a generous budget. And over the years, it has acted very well. In the last decade, it has reached the point, particularly where it is degraded and it is stretched across the three agencies. The need for law enforcement in many ways, particularly after COVID, has become more and more needed on the roadways to manage to manage actually the different driver behavior that is being exhibited, and also to keep our freight, keep our supply chain managed. At DMV, the services have increased. That increase in population, 1.3 to 3.3 million, that's a lot more drivers for them to service. And as each of the areas grow, both in the rural areas and particularly in the urban areas, more locations are needed for them to provide these services. I think they've done an exemplary job of doing more things online and putting it there. And I also want to emphasize, we do work very compatibly together. Obviously, we're competing for the same funds. Also, I think when the highway fund was made exclusive so that it can only be used for certain activities, it was so that we did not tax the general funds. We recognize the state has many needs, and we fully, we all have families. We recognize education, healthcare are important things. I will also put out there, though, a strong transportation system is fundamental, literally, to the quality of life. No matter how you put it, you're going to use it the minute you come out the door. It is what will get you to school, is what will get the goods to you, is how we do manage incidents, emergencies. The first thing in emergency is how do we get resources in? How do we get resources out? How do we keep people out? So a strong transportation system will be the basis for economic growth to support the other areas. But 33 years, 34 years is a long time. It has been taxed, and excusing the pun, there is no more road to kick the can down. If we do not find another sustainable way to support not only the regional ones, the interstates, the 93s, the 95s, and all those other roadways in between, and also looking at how we provide the mobility, which is usually handled more by the RTCs and the transit systems, we're doing a disservice to our citizens. But if we don't find a more sustainable funding, we will have to reduce the scope and right now of what we do. And right now our focus at the department is we are delivering on what was promised, where we have federal grants involved. We are basically taking care of business of keeping the lights on, which is plowing, striping, lighting. So, these are basic ones, but we are going back now to preservation. Our dollars to really put towards capacity projects is slowing, and we have many projects, and we can provide examples those later on there of what is being deferred because we just cannot bring them up at this time.
Thank you. And actually, and yes, if you could provide some additional follow-up information, that would be great. I don't want to put you completely on the spot, but I do think it is helpful if you can think of one or two major projects that have been identified as needs that are kind of no longer in the queue because we did not have the resources available to move them forward. I think that would be helpful. So that's kind of my ask to you, and then to the other agencies as well. If there are particular project or staffing constraints that you are running into because there is not enough revenue to support your agency's needs, especially looking forward into the next few years. I just want to make sure that we have a strong record among the committee of what the consequences of inaction are.
We will provide follow-up information, but quickly, things like in Southern Nevada would be Neon Phase 2 has been delayed. There is a fair amount of right-of-way acquisition on that, $60 million worth of acquisition plus the cost of the project. The Via Nobila has been moved out, deferred a year to fiscal year 2029. We'd love to bring that back in a little bit closer. The phase of Henderson Bowl is being now phased, putting in forward. In Northern Nevada, we still have 4 phases of the Spaghetti Bowl, and those have been moved out. 2A has been moved out 2 years at this point. Passing lanes, we are still pursuing passing lanes at least 2 to 4 a year because we think they're critical to safety, particularly on 95 and 93, but we'd like to put more out. The growth of mining, the lithium mine at Thacker Patch. There are 2 major ones going on around Tonopah. I mean, these are the routes that are now heavily used by freight and increasingly freight. We have the universities calling and asking to meet with us. Can we do more on 95 because they're worried about students going back and forth, and we're putting in as fast as we can. That's just a small sampling, but we can provide more.
Thank you. And then anyone with DMV or DPS?
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair Watts. Again, Tanya Laney, Director of Nevada DMV for the record. First, I appreciate Tracy's recap. As she stated, we do work very cohesively together, and we appreciate that relationship for sure. For the DMV, off the top of my mind of things that, you know, we bring stuff in front of the legislative body to get approval, but there's other things that we don't even bring forward because we know we can't afford it because it blows our cap. Right, so some of those things that I can think of right off the top of my head are the population in Fernley has exploded. It would be ideal to have an office there with 10 to 12 staff, but we can never afford to do so because we can't afford the lease on a new facility and to hire the 10 to 12 additional staff because it takes us outside of our cap. We would love to have a mobile unit that could travel to the rural communities in Nevada, but that takes costs for gas, an RV unit or a van. Travel costs for staff to stay overnight if they're gonna offer services to a jurisdiction for more than 1 day, and we can't bring those proposals forward because we know that we can't afford it because we're outside of our cap. So those are a couple big ones off the top of my head. Some of the other challenges that we face, obviously, with technology and moving more services online, is that we need to make sure that as we're moving those transactions online that we're taking a very security-focused approach to do so, meaning that we have the appropriate staff in place to oversee data security, that we have the proper tools to make sure that as we're engaging with customers online that we know that the customer that we're engaging with is who they say they are, that we have systems that are not penetrated by outside forces trying to get access to the valuable data that the DMV holds. These are all things that go into consideration that we know that we need to address, but to the point made multiple times today, the pie only goes so far. But those are a couple of things off the top of our list that are very critical. And I guess the biggest issue for DMV that we're seeing live out today is that the longer you kick that can down the road, as Tracy stated earlier, the costs become much more unmanageable than if we incrementally plan it to be able to keep our systems up to date year over year versus having to come in front of this body again in 10 and 15 years and do a complete overhaul that's going to cost $300 million more than it would if we addressed it as we went along. But again, that takes strategic planning and focus on being able to fund those items as we go so that we don't have to do the big bang asks every 10, 15 years. And then by the time we get our systems updated, because we go with the lowest bidder or what we can afford to do at the time, we're already 10, 15 years behind the most modern technology. So that's the challenge that we face at the DMV. But again, we appreciate this body and the accommodations that we have received on our technology project. We wouldn't be where we are today with being able to offer the services online to our community without the approvals that we've gotten from this body in the past. And we do greatly appreciate that cooperation as well.
Christy Defer, Deputy Director for Public Safety, again, for the record. I just wanted to bang the drum again since we have the opportunity to, it's no secret that public safety has struggled with the recruitment and retention of sworn officers. And it was wonderful what the legislature did, not last session, but the one before, where they got that huge bump, and it was sorely needed, very much appreciated. But all the other cities and counties are now catching up, and it is critical that we maintain competitiveness in that market. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to retain officers long term. I mean, we can recruit them, we train them, but then they become a hot commodity and they get poached, unfortunately, by the other law enforcement agencies that pay PERS and have higher wages, unfortunately. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge to keep up with that. The other thought that comes to mind is that we're probably one of the only states that don't have a dedicated commercial inspection station. So we've talked about that. The cost is so high to get that started that we haven't been able to get off the ground. And so we have tried to leverage technology and equipment the best we can to have mobile inspections and services throughout the state, but that remains a challenge, and those commercial vehicles are certainly taxing on the roadways. So those are the couple things that come to mind, but I will definitely get other items together and submit them after this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And again, for those who are less familiar with the budgetary process, I particularly appreciate the remarks of Director Laney, because, based on what we think we have coming in the door in terms of money, all of these agencies are given a direction by the governor's office on what to plan for. And so there are things that the agencies do need that are never even brought forward because it is not in the realm of possibility for us to resource them. But it doesn't mean that those aren't important needs for our community. So I appreciate you raising that as an issue that we should all be aware of, that oftentimes when we are debating about the details of a budget, there are things that are not even on there, but that doesn't mean that they're not needed for folks across the state. And I also appreciate the note about staffing. If we are not competitive with particularly our local governments, particularly when it comes to law enforcement, we have these needs, and we are training and investing resources in folks that then leave for local government. We are a training ground for that. And that is not to disparage our local agencies at all, but we have folks that are leaving state agencies not because they don't want to be there or because they prefer to move to a local government agency, but because there is a major difference in compensation. People are leaving agencies and colleagues that they really enjoy being with simply because we can't compete. So members, any other questions? Senator Nguyen.
Just a follow up on that. I don't know if I missed this, and so if I did, do you have an update on what your vacancy rates currently are within NDOT?
For Nevada Department of Transportation, our vacancy rate now is 15 going on to 16. Now, admittedly, in 2023, it was 26%. So we have regained a lot again, thank you to the bump in salaries. So we kind of stemmed the ebb, but we are still seeing people leaving. I had my executive assistant resign yesterday because she was being offered twice as much pay and closer to home.
Thank you. And I guess my kind of to follow up with that, I know that some other agencies, including your own agency, had CDM Smith and Accredited Consulting. And I know that they were previously kind of brought on, as my understanding, to work on the study and the interim working group. But now that's concluded, I believe they're still like, are they still consulting and contracting with NDOT, or how is that like shifted?
We have kept them on. There'll be a new RFP going out this year to kind of continue that service, and that's to continue to analyze the impacts of different potentially funding opportunities, but also we have put them out to be used by our counterparts when they are also looking at how different funding activities are, what the impacts will be. And we have them coordinating with like Jeremy Aguero and other economics in the state, because when we talk about any funding opportunities, we want to make sure that we're all talking the same numbers, that we're not going to get off key by, we say if say a tax increase, and just for education, if it says here we would say with this much, but someone else says it would be this impact. We want to make sure the information is comparing apples to apples. So this is also shared by the RTCs. We share information with them. We share it with other public agencies. We share it with the AGC. It is used by all of them.
In addition to this consultant, do you have other contracts within NDOT that are you're, I guess, outsourcing or using outside consultants or independent contractors to do some of this work? Is this the only one, or do you have others that operate in this area?
This is the primary one.
Okay. What other ones are?
And I'm going to jump in. Tracy Larkin Thomason for the record.
Thank
I want
you.
to make sure we keep our
Good
notes
catch.
clean.
Good
Thank you.
Can you, you said this was the primary one. What others do you have that you can recall offhand?
We don't hire them directly, but like I
Name
said,
again.
oh, thank you. Tracy Larkin Thomason. We do coordinate, as I said, with like Jeremy Aguero and his group. We coordinate with the RTCs. We do not hire anyone else directly.
And I'm sorry, what is that contract, or what portion of the budget is allocated towards that, if you know? I mean, I can always consult with legal or fiscal staff.
Yeah, Sandra Rosenberg, Deputy Director. We'll have to get back to you with that specific number. For our overall budget, I'm sure it would be less than 1%. It's a fairly small dollar amount, but we'll get you the actual number.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And it's a good segue, because we will be hearing from those folks later on today. Members, any additional questions? Okay, seeing none. Thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now move to agenda item number 4, which is an overview of roadway projects, transit funding, and funding needs from the RTC of Southern Nevada.
Good morning, Chairman Watts and Vice Chair Wynn, members of the committee. For the record, my name is MJ Maynard Carey. I am the CEO for the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, and with me today is the amazing Deputy CEO, Angela Castro. We're here today just to provide an update on roadway funding and transit funding. And so some of you have seen this slide over and over again, so I'm going to go quickly through most of this. As I don't think many people know, we are the only agency in the United States that house all of these functions under one roof. So we are the public transit provider, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization, we are the roadway funding agency, we are the traffic manager for the region, and we implemented and oversee the bike share system in downtown Las Vegas. But before I brief you on roadway and transit, I just want to say thank you so much. particularly your leadership, Chairman Watts and Vice Chair Wynn, for the critical extension of fuel revenue indexing. It was a lot of work. I know it was a heavy lift, and I really appreciate your time and effort. Can't thank you enough on behalf of the RTC and our board and our communities. So I'm going to go ahead and just provide some context on how roadways are funded. Primarily, you'll see on the slide that primarily funded by motor vehicle fuel tax, sales tax, and fuel revenue indexing. What's great, again, you're hearing from previous commenters that the inflation and the cost of doing business has critically increased. And because of that fuel revenue indexing, it allows us the lack of degradation for transportation projects. And so keeping pace with the cost of doing business, fuel revenue indexing has certainly helped our purchasing power sustain itself so that we can put more roadway infrastructure in place. So what has FRI done? Since 2014, if you see here on the slide, 736 projects have been awarded, 78 local small businesses have received work. We made a promise to the community. We went to the ballot in 2016 that the money would stay local, and that's a reflection of that. Over 3 billion contracts have been awarded, and over 25,000 jobs have been created. Before FRI was reauthorized in 2025, we sat down and looked at the modeling forecast and realized we would have about $100 million annually for all the jurisdictions to utilize for their local transportation infrastructure. And because of FRI's reauthorization, the RTC, we can now program approximately $300 million annually for roadway projects, so a very significant increase. This next slide, again, is just a visual demonstration of just how important the FRI program has been. If you notice here, the blue along the chart, the blue bars, that represents the motor vehicle fuel tax. Had we not, as a community, indexed fuel tax to inflation, you can see that the tax source would have been flat, if not decreased in some years. So again, this slide illustrates just why extending FRI was so critical. And then again, thanks to the reauthorization of FRI, RTC and our local partners have identified more than 160 roadway projects that now can potentially move forward in the future, again, representing nearly $3 billion in investment across Southern Nevada. And this is just a sample of some of the unfunded projects that were identified by the local jurisdictions that now have the potential of moving forward in the future. So now I'd like to shift to transit and provide an update on RTC's transit system. So in Southern Nevada, as a public transit provider, we are provided to provide complimentary paratransit service within the 3/4-mile boundary of fixed route. The law, the regulations do not require communities to provide transportation for seniors, for veterans, for students, but we do that. We know it's beneficial to the community. We also provide an on-demand service in the southwest portion of town. We realize because of that, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for how we move our community. So how is mobility funded? We are one of 3 states in the U.S. that do not receive any funding at the state level. Alabama, Hawaii, and Nevada do not receive any funding at the state level. So we are primarily funded by sales tax, by grants. We go after every single grant that we can, passenger fares, and then other. And that other represents Medicaid. We have an agreement with the state. We receive some Medicaid reimbursement. Advertising, it's one of the things when in Las Vegas, you got to use leverage, and we do that. And then fund balance. And this is the first time that we have dipped into, this was the last of the stimulus funds. We dipped in again to help support transit this year. I'm proud of the team. We take very seriously our job in overseeing and utilizing taxpayer dollars. If you see here on the slide, again, so let me explain what this number 2, highest fare box recovery ratio means. That means that measures how effectively a transit agency recovers its operating costs from fare payments. So we collect more fare at our fare box than most of our peers. We have the lowest subsidy of all bus systems in the United States. We have the lowest operating costs of all bus systems in the United States. And we are the 13th busiest bus system in the United States, providing about 56 million trips per year. So I'm going to show you a visual of what our transit system looks like today, considering we're the 13th busiest bus system in the United States. So Angela's going to click through here. So this, we operate 39 transit routes. That's what you see there in the gold. The red stars, that highlights our game day express routes. You know, as a traffic manager, we understand the importance of game days. So think of the Raiders game. If not for the game day express, you would find an additional 1,500 to 2,000 cars trying to find a place to park or drop off customers on any given game day. So it's been a very important offering to the community. And then the pink area, that represents our on-demand service in the Southwest Valley that serves about 115,000 residents. And the black border around the transit lines, that is what the Federal Transit Administration, we serve our paratransit customers within that boundary. So that black line around the map shows where the paratransit service area is. And finally, the pink lines and the gray shaded areas, again, represent senior services that we provide, including 13 Silver Star routes and 3 flexible demand response routes. You know, we are one of the fastest growing states for folks to come and retire to. And so we continue to see more demand for services for our senior community. And I think if you don't take public transit, you might think it's just for folks that can't afford a car. Public transit is part of the economic ecosystem in every single community. We decided just about 3-4 months ago, we have Wi-Fi. We're able to take a poll with our customers. We can ask them, how are we doing? What do you need? We ask our customers, where do you work? And what route do you take to get to work? And within 2 weeks time, we heard from over 1,200 riders. And this is just a small representation of where public transit was connecting employees to employers. And so again, the significance of what we do every single day, public transit is taking employees, getting them to work in every single corner of the valley. There were over in the 2 weeks, the 2-week period that we heard from our transit customers, we were providing employees connections to over 240 businesses in the valley. So we have been talking about mobility challenges in Southern Nevada since 2017. We knew that we were going to be facing a fiscal cliff. We started cutting transit service before the pandemic. So in 2019, we started adjusting our budget. Because of the pandemic, we received a significant amount, $303 million in stimulus funds that sort of pushed the problem down the road, kicked the can down the road, if you will. But we have not given up. Every single year, at least at the legislative level or the state level, or at the local level, to identify a solution. And Angela's going to talk a little bit more, Angela Castro will talk a little bit more about that in just a few moments. We've also seen an increased demand for services. And again, you've heard this from every speaker so far today, the increased cost of doing business has been significant. And that has impacted our cash balance, which is the next slide. So this represents revenues and expenditures. And the thing to really pay attention here is the gray shaded area. That is the cash that we have on hand. That is everything that we know today. The sales tax we believe we'll be receiving, funds, et cetera. And obviously, if you see here in fiscal 29, which is for us calendar 28, if we're not able to find a sustainable funding source, we'll begin cutting transit service. And I want to speak to that next, but actually not quite. So again, why people ask, why are you here, RTC? How did you get to this deficit? Well, it's certainly labor costs have increased significantly. Inflation has had a significant impact on how we do business. As I said previously, the demand for mobility has increased. For the first time in 2025, we saw a decrease in sales tax. We are primarily our only tax source for public transit is sales tax. We receive 0.3% of sales tax. That has not increased since 1992. And then we, with the introduction of Uber and Lyft, previously Las Vegas, the transit service we provided in Las Vegas on the Strip was the only profitable route in the United States. And so we've continued to see a decrease in revenue and ridership in the Las Vegas corridor, just because of more mobility choices. So the first thing that we do, again, we work for the public, we are supported by tax dollars. We have to make sure that we are a lean machine. We have to make sure that we are doing everything that we can, first and foremost, before we go out and talk to the public about needing revenue sources. And so, like the Great Recession and like the pandemic, the first thing we'll look at, we freeze positions, we take pay cuts, we cut capital projects, we implement hiring freeze. We are looking today at increasing passenger fares. And then, of course, implementing service freeze. We understand that first and foremost, we are required to make sure that our house is in order before we go out and talk to the public about needing any kind of tax dollars from them and increase in that. So the next couple of slides are really impactful. I'm going to show you what will happen if we're not able to identify a sustainable funding source. We'll be cutting 42% of our transit service over 2 years. And so, again, if you go ahead and click it, Angela. So out of the 39 routes, 15 routes will be totally eliminated and 22 routes will be reduced. So they'll be retracted and we'll also reduce the service hours. So we may be able to get an employee into the quarter for work, but that route may not run later in the evening, so no way to get home. This would affect over 500,000 Clark County residents, and it would also those are ones again that rely on getting to work, to school, to education, hospital, etc. Click again, Ange. So the Game Day Express, we would eliminate 5 of the 7 routes. We'd go down to 2 pickup locations. The on-demand service in West Henderson and the Southwest Valley would be reduced by 2/3. This would leave more than 114,000 residents without access to public transit. We currently serve approximately 23,000 paratransit eligible customers. We operate the 7th busiest paratransit system in the United States. When you retract a service area, you eliminate routes, the paratransit service area is reduced or eliminated in conjunction with those measures. And so over 4,100 customers would fall outside the new service area and would need to find their own transportation to reach it. Paratransit riders would lose direct access to grocery stores, medical facilities, and other critical destinations in Clark County. We estimate it represents about a decrease of 477,000 trips. These reductions also significantly affect seniors. Our senior services would be eliminated, our veteran services would be eliminated. And of course, these are folks, in many cases, that have not a lot of options. In some cases, we're their only option to get in and about and where they need to go. We also, we are a local match for many nonprofits here in Southern Nevada. And that's that last slide that you can, that last point, the specialized services. So we have an annual community mobility program. Again, we are the match for those folks to provide services to seniors and to disabled community. And then we're also the local match for the rural transit services provided here in Southern Nevada. Both of those programs would be significantly impacted. And so with that, I'm going to turn over to Angela. She's going to talk about potential solutions and also go over what we've been working on again steadily for the last 11 years to talk about the fiscal cliff that we're facing today. Angela.
Good morning, Chairman Watts, Vice Chair Nguyen, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Angela Castro with the RTC. As we discuss potential funding solutions, we think it's really important to briefly recap the various funding conversations that have taken place for at least the last 8 years. And for Assemblyman Patchett, I'm not sure if you know this, and for members in the community, just as a reminder that we are constitutionally prohibited from using motor vehicle fuel tax revenues for transit operations. And I think that's an important clarification as MJ talked about the benefits of FRI and the extension. Many members in the community as of late, as we go out and talk about our funding challenges, have asked, well, RTC, you just got FRI money. We are constitutionally prohibited from using motor vehicle fuel tax dollars for transit operations. And so with that, we're just going to go down memory lane. I've had many different conversations with a lot of you about various funding options. And so let's go back to 2017. With the support of the legislature and the governor, we were able to secure ballot authority through Senate Bill 149, which allowed us to seek voter approval on a one-time sales tax measure that was set to expire in 2020. In 2019, that authority was extended to 2024 to provide flexibility to our board and our community in the event that we all felt that it wasn't the right time to go to a ballot question. And this was really important because in 2019 into 2020, the economy was starting to soften, and we were hearing great concerns from, especially from our transit riders and our community, about the cost, rising costs. Then in 2020, the pandemic happened. And as MJ mentioned earlier, that's when the federal government came to our rescue because everybody was hurting. All of our different communities were hurting. And we received a one-time infusion of money of $303 million. Now, similar to what you're hearing from all of these other industries, right? It was a one-time funding solution. So our crisis and our problem did not go away. It just was pushed out. Then we come back to 2023. Our board and our stakeholders and our community, prior to session, we explored potential transit funding options, including fees, reallocation, similar approaches that you just heard from the Nevada Department of Transportation. It was a priority. However, early in the legislative session, as I met with many of you, our priorities shifted, and our priorities shifted because we also knew we had a roadway funding problem, and there was a lot of interest from private industry as well as from legislators about fixing that through the fuel revenue indexing program, because the fuel revenue indexing program was going to expire in 2026. And as you heard from MJ, we had to maintain jobs. Tens of thousands of jobs were at stake, and our infrastructure, and how do we maintain our infrastructure now and in the future? Hearing that there was a lot of interest in this, and hearing from some of you on the committee, we had to pick, right? What is your priority, RTC? And so we deferred transit and we brought forward roadways. Knowing that we brought forward roadways, we were unsuccessful in the 2023 legislative session. However, thanks to the legislators and thanks to members on this committee, we were still able to receive one-time $5 million funding in the biennium. And so with that, 2025 legislative session came up, and again, roadways was the priority. It was the priority because if we did not get FRI extended, our infrastructure would have been at jeopardy. And so with that, we're leading into 2027. And it's been a decade later as we continue to talk about funding for roadways, funding for transit. We are actively engaging our board, local elected officials, and our key stakeholders to really try to identify what is the best pathway forward. With that, we have, there could potentially be legislative solutions, there could be a ballot question, or we could find other solutions. We are committed to spending the next year in the community, explaining to members of our community what our challenges are from a transit perspective and what the impacts will be prior to us having to make any cuts in 2028. And I remain committed to coming back to all of you as soon as I can figure out and determine with the community, with our board, what are some of those solutions, and identify and drill down and identify that a little bit better.
So that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for having us. We're open to any questions you may have.
Thank you, and we will take questions for the RTC of Southern Nevada before we move on to our presentation from RTC Washoe. So members, any questions for our presenters here? All right, seeing none at this time, I do have a bit of a comment and a question. I think you spoke to this a little bit. This is something I often hear from my constituents as well. The district that I represent includes Maryland Parkway. There's a lot of excitement about the changes to the Maryland Parkway corridor, which is a major transit corridor, and it's being turned into a bus rapid transit system. I know the RTC evaluated light rail, found that would increase ridership. It was, I think, really favored by transit riders as well. And essentially, the only reason that we didn't go in that direction is because we didn't have the resources to do it. It's significantly more capital intensive. My understanding is we're one of the largest metro areas to have bus only public transit service, and we do not have some form of metro system, be that a light rail, an elevated rail, a subway, etc. So I guess the end to that in a question form is, what you're telling us is that with what you're currently projected to receive, not only is there no resources for us to build that higher capacity, higher speed mass transit system that I think a lot of people would like and are used to in other metro areas, but we're actually looking at cutting bus service, particularly in the suburban parts of the valley that are actually growing the fastest. Is that correct?
For the record, MJ Maynard Carey, Chairman Watts, yes. In a nutshell, I think I've heard over the years, I've been at the RTC almost 20 years, that in some cases we've maybe made a generational mistake in not investing in high capacity transit. Our agency has been looking at high capacity transit for over 20 years. And when you talk about, 10 years ago, the cost to build a light rail system was about $130 million per mile. Today, it's about $230 million per mile. And so the answer to that, and it's very tough to go out and talk to folks about a funding deficit when it's just maintaining the current level of transit service that we have, rather than something that I think folks want. And you're exactly right. With the Maryland Parkway, that was absolutely, the alternatives analysis came to a conclusion that the community wanted light rail. We did the math. 1 + 1 = 3. It didn't work. And so we were unable to move forward, and instead received the federal funding that helped us implement now will be in place by the end of the year, bus rapid transit system on Maryland Parkway.
Thank you for that. And, I'll see if anyone else has questions, but I also appreciate some of the history that you provided on some of the ballot questions, the advisory questions. And, it makes sense that we didn't want to bring some of these things forward in times when the economy was softening. But I think just to put a fine point on this, what we hear is that the community wants a much more robust transit and transportation system. But we have also seen that when there are measures brought before the public to fund those improvements, it is difficult. We have gotten some through, particularly in Southern Nevada, but not by overwhelming margins. We have seen some of those initiatives fail in rural counties. So I just want to point out that there is some difference between what folks want and when we put it to the voters, what they are willing to voluntarily step up and invest in. And I'll just say that's why it is important for elected officials at the state and local level to step up and make some of these decisions. So not really a question there, just a comment. Members, any other questions for RTC Southern Nevada before we move to Washoe County? All right, thank you both so much. And now we will turn our attention up north. Whenever you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning, Chair Watson, the committee. My name is Paul Nelson. I'm the Government Affairs Officer at RTC Washoe, and I'm joined here with Mike.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. Michael Hillerby on behalf of RTC Washoe. Thank you.
So first off, we'll start with what and who is RTC Washoe. Well, we were established by the legislature back in 1979, and really it's all things transportation related. We do that in three main ways. Like RTC of Southern Nevada, we are the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and we also operate our transit system. What makes us unique throughout the country really is that we also do the engineering and construction of some of our larger non-highway roads throughout Washoe County. So as the MPO, we're a federal construct. It's a minimum of 50,000 for the population to be an MPO. There are 4 in Nevada, including RTC Washoe and Southern, Carson area, and Tahoe Regional. And then the one thing that we've got as the MPO is we're required by law to have a 20-year regional transportation plan. If you look at this number, we've got 107 projects in our 20-year plan, and that totals approximately $4.6 billion. Right now, just this year, I believe we're working on 27 projects, and you'll see what the numbers calculate on that. But 4.6 billion, quite a lot of money to put into our community over the next 20 years or so. So this is how the project process works. It starts out in that RTP, the long-range process. Then we move down to the 5-year outlook, where some of those projects rise to the top, and that's our Regional Transportation Improvement Program, or the RTIP. Once we get down to that 2-year area, we go to our local jurisdictions, and we have our Street and Highway Program, interlocal cooperative agreements. After that 2-year outlook, we really get down to the budget, and that's when we begin construction. So our strategic goals, we've got 7 of them at RTC Washoe. One of them, expand public transportation utilization, promote neighborhood mobility, reimagine the Truckee River as a transportation corridor. We do have a pathway that goes along the Truckee River. We're looking at using that better for pedestrians and bicycles and things like that. Proactively managing congestion. We've got a lot of projects, especially in the North Valleys and Spanish Springs, where we are adding capacity because those areas are really growing faster than a lot of the areas in Washoe County. Improve network safety. Every project we do, whether it's a pavement rehabilitation project or a new road or a capacity project, we're always looking at ways that we can make the network safer. Sustainable transportation funding. This is something that we're lucky because we do have indexing with our fuel taxes, but as you'll find out, there are some shortfalls in some ways that we're looking at trying to bridge that gap. And then be a high-functioning organization. We have a lot of talented staff and consultants on board, and we always work as efficiently and do as well as we can when it comes to improving our transportation system. So how does RTC impact the local economy? Well, if you take a look at our revenues, we have about $290 million in revenue. Most of that money you can see is fuel tax. So we collect about $118 million. The next chunk of the pie, the second largest, is federal funding. We get some of that through formula funding dollars. Some of that we apply for discretionary grants. We also have some sales tax that we collect, as well as passenger fares, and then the regional road impact fees. Those are fees that when developers come in, they pay a certain amount per unit. That goes into a bucket where we can improve capacity that's caused, that adds the more cars because of those projects. Then if you look at our expenses, about $329 million, you can see that we're actually spending more money this year than we're bringing in. That was strategic. We've put money away, knowing that we've got some larger projects that we're working on this year. Some of the things that you can see that we're spending it on, the biggest chunk, capacity improvement. And then if you look over on the preservation multimodal projects up on the top, those are most of our construction projects. Then when you look at our sales tax dollars, our sales tax we use to operate our transit. So you've got capital costs, whether that's for our fixed route or for our paratransit. We've also got some MPO operating costs. You can see that's one of the smallest chunks of our pie is the operating. We have about 75 employees, and one of the nice things about that is that when we have a good year, we can do more projects. It doesn't really affect staff. When we have a bad year, we do less projects. There aren't layoffs that we face. So when you look at the impact of the money that we're investing into our community, we did about 10 million square feet of pavement preservation in 2024. The money that we invested in construction led to about 2,700 full-time infrastructure or construction jobs. That was an increase from 2023. We also contract with UNR. They do some of our traffic signal timing, things like that. They do a lot of work for us that we contract with them. And 171 million in transportation funding invested, which was also up from 2023. So how does the RTC fuel tax compare? As I mentioned, we do index, and that is on a 10-year rolling average, but as you can see, that number isn't keeping up with what it used to. And a lot of that is because of fuel efficiency. There's more EVs on the road, there are more hybrids on the road. So if you look at the gallons purchased per capita, people are buying less fuel now than they were about 10 years ago. If you look at the vehicle miles traveled per capita, that number is going up. So even though people are driving more, they're buying less gas. So even with the indexing, we're seeing that the revenue that we're bringing in is kind of staying flat compared to the inflation that we're seeing with materials and labor for construction. So we're looking at a couple of ways to find some sustainable funding. Mike will get into that after this presentation. When you look at the annual fuel tax, pavement condition, it shows the success that we're having. If you look at that yellow line right there, this is our pavement condition index, and it shows that anything above 80 really is where we want to be. That yellow line is our regional roads, the ones that RTC handles, and we are above that 80 threshold. Where you look at the other lines, you've got Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. Ours are higher. We're keeping our pavement in better condition. We do have a pavement preservation program in place, and we do have a lot of projects that we do every year to rehab the pavement if necessary. So paying for growth, I mentioned the regional road impact fees. So for a single family dwelling in the north, we basically divide this up between the north part of I-80 and the south part of I-80. You can see the numbers there for the fee for a single family residence or a multifamily residence in the north and in the south. And then we are able to use that funding to make improvements somewhere in that area. So you've got the north side, you've got the south side, and we can make capacity improvements from that bucket of money in that area. Some of the projects that we've done recently with that, Sky Vista up in the North Valleys, we widened that, put a roundabout in. That was all paid with RIF funding. We didn't have to use any tax money. In the south, we did one on Steamboat Parkway, same thing. Didn't have to use any tax dollars to build that road. So federal funding, we have been very successful with some of our grant applications. You can see a list of them that we've had here since 2022. Another one that's not on our list that we recently received was a grant of $21.5 million that we are using to purchase 19 hybrid buses. That will allow us to retire our aging electric buses that we bought from Proterra. That company went bankrupt. We have a hard time buying parts for the buses when they break down. So this will allow us to replace those buses with the hybrid diesel buses. That is part of the low-no bus program where we got that funding. So some current street and highway projects that we're working on. Arlington Avenue Bridges, this is a really important project that we started back in July. We're expecting to wrap this one up in possibly as early as May. This is largely funded through federal dollars. We got a raise grant. We also got some congressionally directed spending. West 4th Street Safety Project, we just broke ground on this yesterday. This is a safety project. A lot of this funding comes from HSIP dollars, federal funding to make the road safer. Mill Street Capacity and Safety, we started this one last summer and we expect that to wrap up this spring. And then Sparks Boulevard Capacity Improvement. This one is going to stretch basically from I-80 up to Bering Boulevard, which is a couple of miles, and it's adding an additional lane in each direction. So it'll go from 4 lanes to 6 lanes. It'll also improve some multimodal, the multi-use path, sidewalks, improvements along the ditch between the roadway. Upcoming projects, the biggest little bike network. So this is making it easier and more comfortable for people who live south of Interstate 80 in the downtown or midtown areas, Old Southwest, to ride their bike up to the north side of Interstate 80, particularly in the university area. There's also one that goes, a route that goes east and west. This project will also tie in with that West 4th Street Safety Project where we're building a multimodal or a multi-use path. Keystone Avenue Bridge, this one we're hoping to break ground on in a few years. This is structurally deficient. It is still safe, but it is aging and it was built for cars. We are going to add some multimodal aspects to it. So that one is in design right now. North Valley's North Virginia Street Capacity. Once NDOT is finished with the next phase of the 395 project, we will start on this project to widen Virginia Street all the way up to Stead. And then the Sun Valley Boulevard corridor improvements. We're looking at getting some federal funding for this right now. We just applied for a build grant of $25 million. This is a really expensive project. You can see about half of that money is actually going to fixing the drainage that goes along with that roadway. So there's a lot of important improvements we'll be making on that road, but we have to do the drainage before we can do anything else. So what is public transportation in Washoe County? Well, we've got several different programs. RTC Ride is the backbone of our transit system. It's the fixed route service. Flex Ride is our version of Uber or Lyft, where it's a smaller cutaway bus that will pick you up curb to curb, but it's in 4 zones within Reno and Sparks. And those are in zones where we don't have enough demand for a fixed route service, but there is still a need for public transit. So same price if people want to go anywhere within that zone, door to door. If they want to go outside of that zone, they'll take you to a bus stop and then you can be on your way. Access, this is our paratransit. As you heard from one of the public commenters, it's very important for some of our people with disabilities. We have Vanpool. Vanpool is very successful in our area. We're one of the top 10 in terms of the numbers in our fleet for Vanpool. It's a carpooling service. One of the reasons that we are so successful is because we've got so many employers that work outside of Reno and Sparks, particularly out at the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center. We've got people that commute to Lake Tahoe, Carson City, Susanville, areas all over the place. So that's been very valuable. It took about 20 million miles traveled off of our roads just last year. Then other services we have, RTC Smart Trips, Washoe Senior Ride, Mobility Center, and then our public transit contractors. So we own the buses. We hire Keolis to operate our ride system, and MTM they do our transportation for our Flex Ride and our paratransit. So the impact that we've had, we're actually close now. This was in 2023. We're right up around 6 million rides per year. And we are seeing a lot of growth. For the last 41 months, we've seen month-over-month growth in our ridership. 20 million plus vehicle miles saved through Vanpool, as I mentioned. One of the things that I will point out with our bus system is that about 60% of those trips are work-related. So it's very important for our local economy to get people to and from work. We also were looking at future riders. We've got 2 programs that we think are very beneficial to the community and possibly the future of our ridership. First one is the EdPass program. So we've got 4 colleges up in the north, and we have a program that will let any student or employee of the University of Nevada, Truckee Meadows Community College, Desert Research Institute, or Western Nevada College take our buses for free, any route, anytime. Another one that we just started this year as a pilot project is the Youth Ride Free. This one we partnered with Washoe County School District mainly because they were seeing an increase in tardiness and absenteeism. And the thought was possibly transportation or lack of transportation might have been a reason why they were seeing so many absences. So we partnered with them. We are seeing a decrease in the absenteeism. But what we're noticing more than anything is that most of the rides that students are taking are for after-school jobs. We thought that mainly a lot of that would be extracurricular activities for sports or band or choir or something like that. But we're also seeing that it's very important for kids that also want to have jobs after school. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mike.
Good morning again. Michael Hillerby on behalf of RTC. Thank you for your time to hear some more about the organization. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some current activities and ongoing things the board has directed us on. You've clearly heard a theme today, and you'll hear it advanced more about the challenge with that curve, regardless of which graph you look at, total revenue, gallons sold, as you compare that to vehicle miles traveled because of all the things you've already heard about, overall corporate average fuel economy across the fleet, and the advance of alternative fueled vehicles. We've got a long-term problem. We were very fortunate in northern Nevada. Let me back up. I think I mentioned the studies you're going to hear in the next 3 speakers, so I won't get ahead of where they are, both at the national and local level and state level, looking at options and what's going on in that world. Our board has been forward-looking for a long time. Go back to the mid-2000s. They looked at the issue of the fuel tax and this curve even at that point. And with the help of our voters, the legislature and governor ultimately were able in 2008 and 9 to enact a fuel revenue indexing in Washoe County. That's been very beneficial. You saw the chart on Paul's and the number of things that it's done, and you certainly saw an update from Southern Nevada on what it has done for them. It's critical and has been for both of us, Washoe RTC as well as Southern Nevada. But ultimately, that curve problem still exists. It is not keeping up. The leadership our elected board has shown over the years, one of the things is we've looked again at what are the options moving forward, and you'll hear more about this in some more detail in the NDOT study, and you've heard about it today. What do you do about people that are either paying nothing for driving on the roads at the moment, because again, this is almost exclusively funded and primarily funded by fuel taxes, or those that are paying less than an equivalent vehicle, i.e. EV and hybrid vehicles? There have been a variety of proposals passed in the vast majority of states. You'll hear more about that. Our board at their most recent meeting directed us to move forward and look for ways to enact at the local level an EV and hybrid fee in Washoe County. That would be sure, like our fuel revenue indexing, that revenue generated there is equal to the county portion and stay in Washoe County. Clearly there's an appetite. There are a lot of discussions going on about what to do at the NDOT and the federal level, Southern Nevada RTC, others. We look forward to working with you, with this body, into the 2027 session and others to see where that goes and what that may ultimately come out. But again, our board, in their sort of forward thinking and their willingness to do that over the years, has directed us to pursue that. And we look forward to working with you on that and be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. Members, any questions for RTC Washoe? All right, I think that does it. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item number 5. We are going to receive a presentation on electric vehicle fees, retail delivery fees, road user charges that have been imposed in other states. We have someone joining us online from the National Conference of State Legislatures to give us a look at some of the initiatives that have been pursued in other states across the country to bring in additional resources for transportation. So we welcome the representatives from NCSL. Thanks for joining us, and you can begin whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Chair Watts, for inviting us to present today, and it's really edifying to hear about all the challenges that you all are kind of confronting and dealing with in Nevada. A lot of common themes with what we're hearing from other states and regions throughout the country. My name is Douglas Schinkel. I am the Transportation Program Director at the National Conference of State Legislatures, NCSL, which is a membership organization that serves all 50 state legislatures and legislative staff, such as all of you helping support this committee. I'm happy to provide an update on what some state transportation funding trends and be particularly responsive to a couple of things that you had asked for, specifically Chair Watts, specific to EV fees and some things going on in Colorado. And my colleague Lexi Elio, who you actually see on the screen here, will be weighing in and providing some of the information we gathered on, further information we gathered on EV registration fees and specifically in Colorado. But we want to kind of go through a presentation, give you a few kind of slides to kind of orient the present, the kind of current situation we're in, and then just go into some of the most common funding alternatives we're seeing with an emphasis on user fees. So with that, Lexi, if you can advance to the next slide. So this first slide is a chart from the National Association of State Budget Officers, NASBO. And what that shows, and I think the most important thing here to see here, is that top blue line. And of course, the kind of the through line through a lot of these discussions that were had today, but states are grappling with throughout the country, is that the main source of revenue for state transportation funds is traditionally the motor fuel tax. And the motor fuel tax is in decline in most states due to a confluence of increasing fuel efficiency from vehicles that do use some some level of fuel, and then the increasing prevalence of electric vehicles and other alternative fuel vehicles that do not use gas at all or use it in much less of it. So what you'll see here from this in this chart is just that, you can see in 2016, motor fuel tax revenue accounted for, on average, kind of cumulatively of all 50 states combined, 41.1% of overall transportation trust fund state revenue. These are state revenue sources, not the federal revenue. 41.1. You fast forward 10 years later, and that has declined fairly significantly, about 4.5%, 5.5%. And while we did see a slight uptick last year, and that may be because more states have started indexing their gas taxes and have raised their gas taxes of late. But overall, the trend we're seeing is that these are continuing, this source of revenue is continuing to decline. Some of the difference is being made up by kind of just a large other category, and that sometimes includes things like general funds and also just kind of non-transportation user fee purposes. But the general trend we're seeing from all states, regardless, large, small, urban, rural, growing, stable population, declining, is that their motor fuel tax revenues are declining or not growing at the rate that they once were. And next slide, Lexi. And one thing that I heard referenced by a few folks, and we think this is a helpful slide to include, is that, a lot of times states and lawmakers such as yourselves are looking to tap into existing revenues that you think are relevant and make sense and would make sense to go into transportation. And what we see is that the diversion level of gas tax revenue is fairly low in the Western United States. I know that there are sometimes conditions where these numbers are not necessarily accurate year to year, and something may happen in a particular budget year. But generally, states are definitely taking a look at trying to keep most of their gas tax revenue in the transportation trust funds, but also identifying other kind of motor vehicle related or transportation related fees or revenue sources that could perhaps be put into the transportation trust fund. Next slide, please, Lexi. So as reference, I want to just quickly, show that, state gas tax changes have actually been fairly frequent and common over the last 13 years. This shows all the states that have increased their gas tax since 2013. Nevada is not one of those. You see that 35 states and DC have done so, and some states have done it multiple times in that time. And at the same time, some of those states have gone in and indexed their gas taxes so that they track with population growth or CPI or the National Highway Construction Cost Index or something that kind of keeps them slowly rising. There's usually a ceiling on these indexes, but slowly rising so they can in some way stay with these incredible inflationary pressures we're seeing on construction costs. Next slide, please. I call this our potpourri slide. The purpose of this is to kind of show you that states use many different funding sources to pay for their transportation systems. I'm not going to say that, each of these bullet points is something that's used by a lot of the states or generates a lot of revenue, but I think really this function is perhaps generates some ideas. Maybe you probably have many of these taxes or fees in your state. Perhaps some of them can be reallocated in some way to help support transportation. Some of them make a lot of sense to perhaps be in the transportation trust fund. Like one interesting one I always point out is Georgia put in I think it was a $2 or so a night hotel tax several years back, and that money is dedicated to the transportation trust fund. Obviously, a lot of folks using hotels are perhaps not locals or people that are using your transportation systems in general. You can see a lot of other options on there. Next slide, please. I wanted to give a quick overview of road usage charges because that's kind of one of the potential solutions to bolster or supplement or replace motor fuel taxes that states are investigating. In essence, a RUC or a mileage-based user fee in MBUF is simply a way to tax based on use of the roadway and actually a per mile charge. There are 4 states that now operate voluntary RUC programs: Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii. I want to note that all of these programs are, like I said, voluntary. They were all created by the state legislatures in those states. They have varying levels of eligible vehicles. And Lexi, why don't you go to the next slide and we'll show some of that. This slide shows 3 of the 4 programs. We're going to go to Virginia in a moment because Virginia's program is structured quite a bit differently. But you see these programs are relatively similar, but there are some important distinctions between them. You'll see that in some states, in Utah, for example, only really just focusing on trying to capture revenue from electric vehicles, which of course are not paying the motor fuel tax. Whereas in Oregon there's kind of a broader group of vehicles that are eligible, kind of recognizing the reality that really at the moment, fuel efficient vehicles are more of the source of the decline in the motor fuel tax rather than electric vehicles. You can see that the per rate mileage, the per mileage rate is fairly similar in all these states. All of these states have a cap on their EV, meaning that if you're on your RUC program, meaning that if you voluntarily enroll in the RUC program, you are not going to pay more than whatever the EV fee is or the alternative fuel vehicle registration fee is in that state. I wanted to note a couple other things. Oregon's is the oldest program. Oregon passed a significant transportation funding bill last year, and the intention there is that by 2031, all vehicles not powered by gas will be required to enroll in the RUC program. And if you do not enroll in the RUC, you can opt out of the RUC program, but then you have to pay a much more significant EV fee of $340. And really the thinking there is to push more drivers into these RUC programs, achieve scale, helps you understand inefficiencies and how these systems work and kind of refine them. There's of course a lot of questions about how you actually collect these mileage fees, and we'll go into that in a moment. Want to note that in Utah, as I mentioned, it's really it's electric vehicle specific. And Utah has made some recent programmatic changes that I think will increase the scale of the program and also reduce collection costs. In Hawaii, their program just started in 2025. So at the moment, electric vehicle owners in Hawaii can opt into this program and they will pay no more than the $50 electric vehicle registration fee that currently exists in Hawaii. However, in July 2028, this participation in this program will become mandatory for electric vehicle owners in the state, and that $50 cap will be lifted. And the kind of future plans are to intend to potentially bring some, if not all, of the vehicles in Hawaii into this RUC system and perhaps fully transition from gas tax. Hawaii, I would note, and this is a good place to kind of maybe touch quickly on how do you collect these fees. And that's one of the most, I think, thorny issues. There's implementation and technology questions. There's also kind of public perception around, the kind of tracking or reporting of these miles. Hawaii is one of about 13 or 14 states that have an annual required state vehicle safety inspection. And because of that, they have a very simple way that already exists to collect this. It's just simply you go in, you compare your odometer reading to the year before, and then you get charged accordingly. Based on the mileage per mile rate. Now there are some states that are looking at creating payment plans. So if you're a driver, a vehicle owner in that state, you don't necessarily have to pay all of this fee at once. That's maybe broken up into 1 or 2 or 4 payments. But just wanted to mention that. So Hawaii is definitely a state to keep an eye on there. Lexi, let's go to the next slide so I can briefly tell you about Virginia. Virginia's program is quite a bit different. And of course, they're the largest state population-wise of all these states with a RUC. You'll note that the eligible vehicles are include EVs, but they also include fuel-efficient vehicles. So essentially, if you have a fuel-efficient vehicle or an EV in the state of Virginia, you have to either pay a highway use fee or you can opt into this mileage use fee program. The mileage choice fee is calculated by dividing the highway use fee by the average number of miles traveled by a passenger vehicle in Virginia, which is about close to 12,000, to determine a per mile fee. And because of kind of the structure of their system, they have many more vehicles in their RUC, and that enables them to, kind of, like I said, iron out some of the implementation challenges, and also potentially get to a place where this is actually collecting a decent amount of revenue, because these programs at the moment are not necessarily, it's really like beta testing to get to a point where these systems in the future can collect more revenue, but right now it's kind of working out the kinks. And so with that, next slide, please, Lexi. And I think we're going to go to Lexi now. She's going to fill you all in on some of the details of how states structure their electric vehicle registration fees, as well as tell you a little bit more about delivery fees and some other options states are looking at. And I'll be back on later to wrap up the presentation.
Thanks, Doug. So electric vehicle registration fees are at the other end of the spectrum as compared to a RUC, with only 9 states not charging electric vehicles additional registration fees. These fees range from $50 on the low end in Hawaii and South Dakota, up to $290 in New Jersey, starting in 2028, $270 this year. And as you can see from the bar chart, electric vehicles comprise a larger share of the national fleet each year, although adoption ranges from quite low in some states like Mississippi and North Dakota, all the way up to 3.4% of the fleet in California. And there are a few states that have dynamic EV registration fees, or fees that increase and change over time. So the 10 states shaded in our light blue here currently indexed to the CPI or another measure of inflation, but some of the states in this darker blue-black color increase their fees in a different way. So Georgia indexes to fuel efficiency as measured in the national fleet. Michigan indexes to the gas tax, which is quite interesting because Michigan just passed a significant increase in their gas tax last year. They increased from 31 to 52.4 cents per gallon, which increased their electric vehicle registration fees from $160 to $267 per year. Missouri and New Jersey take a different approach with stepped annual increases, and they've each chosen a 5-year time horizon. Many states, 32 states and Washington, D.C., also choose to charge increased registration fees for hybrid vehicles. An important distinction here, this includes both a traditional hybrid vehicle that runs off of gasoline, think a Prius with regenerative braking, as well as a plug-in electric hybrid vehicle that can use either electricity or gas. So you can see the fee range is quite large in our upper right-hand corner here, from just over $23 for a hybrid vehicle in Utah to $150 for a plug-in electric hybrid vehicle in Ohio. So there are a few states that choose to charge plug-in hybrid electric vehicles the same amount as either a hybrid or an electric vehicle, but many states choose to charge them a fee amount somewhere in between. And you can see from our bar chart here that hybrid vehicles have a higher penetration in the fleet than electric vehicles, but a slower adoption rate. Plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which are a bit of a newer technology, are seeing a faster adoption curve, but lower general adoption, somewhat similar to electric vehicles. Hybrid adoption ranging from about 1% in North Dakota up to 4.6% in California. I know we were asked to provide some information specific to Colorado's electric vehicle fee structure, and so we'll provide a brief summary of the changes made in Senate Bill 260, passed in 2021, which was a larger transportation funding reform package that included fees on gasoline and diesel, as well as some fees that we'll touch on later, such as a retail delivery and transportation network company or ride-hailing. But specific to electric vehicles, this bill indexed the existing fee, which applied to both electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. So the original fee was $50, but after indexing to CPI annually for about 5 years, that fee sits at about $60 today. The bill also created annual additional road usage equalization registration fees, bit of a mouthful, but they differentiate between electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrids. So a bit small, but on the right side of our screen, the bill prescribed an annual fee increase schedule, starting from just $4 additional for electric vehicles, all the way up to $96 additional in fiscal year 31, with a similar increase schedule for the plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, starting at $3 all the way up to $27 additional in fiscal year 31. After the prescribed increases end in fiscal year 31, both of these fees will be indexed annually using the National Highway Construction Cost Index that Doug mentioned briefly earlier. This index is managed by the Federal Highway Administration and, somewhat intuitive to its name, measures the average change over time in prices paid by state DOTs for roadway construction costs and services. And notably, the NHCCI has outpaced the CPI since mid-2021. An important provision of this bill was requiring a rather robust legislative report 5 years later, so coming up in the 2026 interim, on all of the projects that were implemented with funding provided by the bill, as well as other projects and transportation needs for the next 5 years. Required the 3 implementing agencies to make recommendations to the legislature on both whether additional general fund money would be needed or whether any of the individual fee amounts and formulas should be changed, as well as requiring consideration of any changes in average fuel efficiency across the fleet. On our next slide, we have a sense of both how much revenue these fees are generating as well as how they are allocated. So that base index $50 fee, 60% of that goes to Colorado's primary transportation account, the Highway Users Tax Fund, and 40% to a grant fund dedicated to electric vehicle infrastructure. Of the 60% going to the Highway Users Tax Fund, those 2 shaded colors, 60% stays with the state and 40% flows to localities. That road usage equalization registration fee, so eventually the additional $96 or $27 for EVs and PHEVs, all goes to the primary transportation account with that same 60-40 state-local split. You can see actuals as well as projections provided by the Colorado Department of Transportation for these fees over time. And they do assume a modest increase in electric vehicles and expect that road usage equalization fee to continue becoming a larger piece of the pie as those prescribed increases continue. Turning the page a bit to a different type of fee, we have fees on transportation network companies, also known as ride-hailing companies, so Uber, Lyft, Waymo. Our 7 states shaded in the light blue color here dedicate all or part of these fees to transportation purposes, as opposed to the states in that darker blue dedicating revenue to the general fund or using it to regulate TNCs. States charge a per ride fee or a percentage of total TNC revenues. And for another example of revenue generation potential, Massachusetts is collecting about $15 million a year with a 20-cent fee. Colorado charges a 30-cent per ride fee with a discount of 15 cents for rides in zero-emission vehicles, and revenue has grown to $11.7 million collected in 2025. There are only 2 states that have currently enacted retail delivery fees, Colorado and Minnesota, and they've structured them quite differently, which offers an interesting comparison. So you can see in that bolded text there that Minnesota charges a fee almost twice that of Colorado's, 50 cents versus 27 cents, but Minnesota includes several exemptions. Baby products, medical devices, and perhaps most notably food, including both groceries and prepared food, are exempted from the fee. Minnesota's fee also does not apply until $100 of eligible items have been included in it. Both states include exemptions for small businesses, albeit at different thresholds, and do use this revenue for transportation purposes. Here we have a sense of how much revenue these fees are generating. So you can see in fiscal year 25, Colorado collected over $100 million with that 27-cent fee, and Minnesota just almost reaching $20 million in the same year with the 50-cent fee, but more restrictions and less applicability. And both states are projected to collect more revenue in fiscal year 26 than the year before. With that, I'll pass it back to Doug to cover our last fee type and close out the presentation.
Thank you, Lexi. The last user fee we're going to just quickly go over is kilowatt charges, per kilowatt hour charges, which i.e. filling up at the electric vehicle charging station and paying a fee, so much more of a kind of equivalent to a gas tax in terms of tying the use to the fuel source rather than actual usage of the road, which would be the case with like something like a mileage-based user fee. So there are 11 states that have enacted laws taxing the consumption of electricity at public EV charging stations. Almost all of these pieces of legislation were enacted in the last 5 or 6 years, with the exception of Pennsylvania. Revenue is mostly dedicated to transportation infrastructure. In a few states, they do dedicate a little bit of it to things around electrification. The key thing to point out here is that thus far, all the states that have implemented these have focused on publicly available charging stations, so no in-home charging. It is certainly possible to apply such a fee to in-home charging, but it is more challenging from a technical and administrative perspective. So in the short term, this is kind of what states have focused on. I think one of the big perhaps potential benefits of this sort of fee is that if you have someone who's driving through your state and, you know, previously had an ICE vehicle, power vehicle, and they now have an electric vehicle, well, they're now not paying that gas tax while they're traveling through your state. You're not capturing anything from them while they're using your roadways. So this is a way to theoretically capture some revenue from out-of-state drivers that are driving electric vehicles. I don't think the expectation is that this revenue source will necessarily bring in an amazing amount of money, but I think that in this kind of fiscal environment, every little bit counts. Some of the revenue amounts that we've kind of collected is that Pennsylvania collected 1.6 million last year. Iowa's about 550,000. Kentucky almost 600,000. Utah 1.3 million last year, and those are all kind of trending up. And they're all in various stages of implementation, where not all of these charging stations are necessarily online and compliant quite yet. We would expect with the scale of EV and other with the scale of EV adoption only increasing, that we would see larger amounts of revenue from this in the long term. But that's kind of where we're at the moment. You'll see that there's kind of a range of the per kilowatt hour fees that's, you know, decently wide between 1.7 cents in Pennsylvania and Minnesota, which has the highest fee. Theirs is 5 cents per kilowatt hour, and that will go into effect a couple more years in July 1st, 2027. And I would say, you know, the one maybe challenge with this is, like, you do have to coordinate with utility providers to help get money that is then used for transportation purposes. And is that more, is that challenging and complex in a way that's maybe not worth this revenue? Not sure, but we wanted to kind of give you the full suite of what states are looking at. Let's now go to the next slide, Lexi. And to wrap up, these are just some of our main transportation funding resources. There are a lot of things that we're tracking at the moment, and we think these resources could be helpful to you. One thing that we didn't mention today is, like, more states are taking a look at, if you look at the second to bottom bullet, managed lanes or express lanes, which are, of course, lanes that allow a driver to choose to travel in a lane that theoretically has less congestion and more travel reliability in exchange for paying a fee, but at the same time preserving the same number of free lanes that existed before. So you're not taking away any capacity for non-paying drivers. But with that, I think we'll wrap up our presentation. Happy to take any questions or respond to any requests that we need to let Lexi and I need to do a little bit more digging into.
All right, thank you very much to you both for the presentation. Members, any questions? Assemblymember Carter.
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was actually one of the last points you brought up. I'm trying to wrap my head around about the need to engage the public utilities rather than operating it as a sales tax type of thing for the vendors for public charging. What creates the necessity to engage the public utilities in that type of an effort?
Good question. I think, let's see. So one dynamic is that the actual physical systems to collect, to track and collect and understand the number of per kilowatt hours requires some compliance efforts that typically would include the energy utilities. So I would say that that's the first one I can think of. But you're right, and assembly member, and I believe that there are a few states that structure their per kilowatt hour more as a sales tax. So I do think that it is certainly that there are some different ways to approach this, and that it's certainly possible. I think with all of these kind of new user fees that you just kind of have to implement a new system and work through and refine some of your practices. Lexi, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
Perhaps just that if it's of interest, we could connect you with folks that are currently implementing these fees to talk through some of those implementation solutions.
Great point. Yeah, we've in all those revenue numbers we've collected are from some of the state departments of revenue, or their different departments in the respective states that are responsible for collecting these fees. So if you kind of have more in-depth questions, or you just want to be connected with one of these folks, we would be happy to facilitate that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Following up on that issue briefly, so you said that it is obviously theoretically possible, but no states currently are levying a per kilowatt charge on at-home charging. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. And I'll just say, while I have the ability to put it on the record, that I do think that that poses a significant dilemma and challenge, particularly if we're not considering the residency of folks. Here in Nevada, obviously, we have a lot of people that are traveling here, and so it would be great to get them to contribute when they are charging their electric vehicles here in town. But there are also folks, particularly renters, who do not have access to at-home charging. So I'm concerned both with the fact that certain charging is levied that, and others are not. And then I think the other big issue is, we saw in your presentation that almost all states have some form of EV fee. And so for those folks who are residents and are paying that EV fee, but then also utilize public charging, they are essentially double taxed. So I guess if you have any comments to make on that, you can. Otherwise, I can see if folks have other questions.
Chair, I think everything you say is spot on in terms of this is very thorny, and the fairness question is the one that comes up the most with these flat EV fees, but also things like the per kilowatt charging, or you actually, what you're doing is you're ended up maybe overly focusing on a relatively small amount of vehicles and taxing them perhaps more at rates that are commensurate with their use. I think that's definitely, from what we've heard from talking to other committees and other stakeholders, the biggest kind of drawback to the EV fees and something like the per kilowatt charging is just that it's not really based on actual roadway usage, and it's also disproportionately perhaps impacting a certain class of vehicles that, of course, some states are trying to incentivize to meet other, goals related to environmental outcomes, emissions reductions, et cetera. So I do think that that is a concern. I would say that, once again, it is technologically possible to collect this to do this from homes, but I think that that's a further level of complexity and compliance that may not be worth the squeeze. That is something where it may be worth interfacing with some of the Department of Revenue stakeholders, but also some of the companies that actually administer and operate these electric vehicle charging stations, and the electric and the utilities, because I know there are actually things that technology you can use in your home that can differentiate. I don't want to pretend that I'm really an expert on the kind of energy aspect, but there is technology that can differentiate when you are charging at home and when you are charging an electric vehicle rather than using your electricity for other purposes. So it is technically possible.
Thank you. Yes, but as noted, a lot of logistical issues in that, and both the setup, administration, and enforcement, and the costs associated with that, as you said, that juice may not be worth the squeeze. I think one of the things that we've seen through your presentation that many states are addressing or grappling with, and what we've heard from some of the, especially from the local government presentations, is how critical indexing some of these things is. And so we've heard about, some of these flat fees, and essentially, while there are other issues at play, without indexing, any of these things are going to erode in their effectiveness and essentially have to be revisited by the legislature in the future. And the one other thing that caught my eye when you were discussing road user charges is that states are looking at allowing for installment payments. That has been a big issue of importance to me. While technically our state registration fees are low, the governmental services tax, which helps fund a wide range of services, as was discussed earlier, is pretty high. And that can already be a barrier. Adding additional fees on top of that could be a real challenge for auto drivers. And so the legislature passed a policy which the DMV is working on implementing and hopefully getting up and running early next year, that will allow folks to make to have the option to make payments in installments. And I do think, particularly as you look at potential surcharges on registration, that's a really important consideration. So, members, any other questions for NCSL? Member Karras, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. What a great presentation full of very good information and lots of choices. I have to say that I would be against making our citizens' electrical bills any more confusing than they already are. That's a big concern. It's an issue that we're already dealing with. And I don't like it because it logistically, even for NV Energy and all our different electrical companies in the state, how difficult it would be to figure out which kilowatt hours were for the charging of the vehicle and which kilowatt hours were for what they are using to cook or dry their clothes, heat their houses, whatever. I do know that something that may be simpler, I did like the idea of it being based on annual mileage, because our DMV in Nevada already requires you to submit your odometer reading when you submit your registration. So that would not incur any new administration duties, incurring more burden on our DMV. I did want to ask, because I wasn't quite clear on all these various systems, and I'm sure it's different state by state, but the difference between hybrids and EVs and where these fees are going, basically, they're going to pay a tax if they're using gasoline. And then if we did it by mileage, it might get messy for them at the DMV. So I think there's a little bit of work to be done for that, but I think that's more viable than putting it on the electrical bill. I just look at it as a nightmare.
I agree with you, member. Anybody else? Questions? All right. Well, thank you both so much again for providing this overview, as well as the links to those resources that NCSL has compiled. We very much appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chair Watts.
Okay, we will now move on to agenda item number 6, which is a presentation on the Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities study, revenue options for transportation infrastructure in the electric vehicle transition. So we welcome Director Tolles. Always good to see you again. And Mr. Komprotek, good to see you again as well. As soon as you're ready, you can begin.
Thank you, Chair and members of this committee. For the record, my name is Jill Tolles. I am the Executive Director of the Kenny Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities. We do have a presentation if you'd like to pull that up. Or just give us the signal if you can see it on your end.
We will get that worked out. Okay.
Fantastic.
We can see it.
Thank you. Once again, Jill Tolles for the record. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the Kenny Gwynn Center for Policy Priorities, and knowing that this is the first time that we are presenting to this committee, we are a data-driven, independent, nonpartisan policy research center across the state of Nevada. We are affiliated with the University of Nevada, Reno, and we also have working partnerships with UNLV, with Boyd Law School, and subject matter experts across the state. And as I said, I have the privilege of serving as the executive director of this amazing institution. And I'm also here to introduce Mark Krompottek, our interim director of economic and fiscal policy. Many of you might recognize his name and face from his years of service in this body in the Legislative Council Bureau. He retired as the senior fiscal analyst for the Senate. And we are fortunate to have his wisdom and expertise as the project manager and principal investigator on this research study. And again, because this is the first time we're presenting to this committee, just want to give a little bit of background on the Gwynn Center, that we were named after Governor Kenny Gwynn, who was known for knowing the budget inside and out, and for being a champion of education, and particularly for his ability to work across party lines. One of my favorite things about the genesis of this institute was that it was a prominent Democrat who recommended that it be named after a Republican governor, and it has been bipartisan in its leadership and nonpartisan in its approach to research ever since. We study many areas, including economic and fiscal policy, education policy, and health and social policy as our main areas of focus. And then we also study governance and elections, and in the past have studied natural resources and land. And it seems to be having a mind of its own, but thank you for battling the gremlins. And this is my favorite illustration, just to make the point that in today's political discourse, oftentimes we have people who come to issues with their own set of facts and information, and they see very different realities. And in the case with these two gentlemen fighting over how many bars are on the floor, and oftentimes with our own information, algorithms, newsfeed, and friends and family, we truly do look at the other side and think that perhaps they don't have all the right information. The Gwynn Center is not here to take one side or the other. The Gwynn Center is here to research and lay out all the relevant data and facts so that we can help better inform the public and our decision makers for the good of Nevada. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the principal investigator on this study, Mark Krompottek.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Mark Krompottek, Interim Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy with the Gwynn Center. Our first slide here, slide 7, highlights the growth in EVs and what we call generally use the term HEVs. It includes all hybrid electric vehicles. This looks at Washoe County specifically because this work was done under a contract with the Washoe RTC. And so you'll see a focus on Washoe County throughout, but this highlights from June 2020 through June 2024, the increase in hybrid vehicles, which is the purple line, increasing from 6,354 to 13,506. And then electric vehicles, which is the green line on the graph, increasing from 1,583 to 8,029. And with respect to electric vehicles over this period of time, that is an increase of 407% in the number of registered electric vehicles. And with respect to HEVs, that's an increase of about 112%. And the information that we're presenting here is information that was provided by the DMV under statute. Yeah, and they also report vehicle miles traveled as well. Where's the mouse? Excuse me 1 second.
Of course. We'll have our staff help out if there are still gremlins in the PowerPoint.
So the next slide illustrates taxable gallons of fuel sold in Washoe County. This is a theme you've heard from other presenters this morning. And of course, the gasoline tax is based on the number of fuel gallons sold, taxable fuel gallons sold. This has increased year over year from 2022 through 2024. And again, this is Washoe County specific information showing the trends in gas taxable gallons of fuel sold. In Washoe County, and this is probably true with other counties of the state overall, currently EV and HEV owners pay the $33 annual registration fee, which is directed to the State Highway Fund. This applies to all registered vehicle owners in the state, regardless of whether the vehicle is an EV or a gas-powered vehicle. And then also EV and HEV owners pay the basic governmental services tax, which you referred to a bit earlier, Mr. Chair. That's directed to the state, a portion of it is directed to the State Highway Fund, the State Education Fund, and local counties and cities, following a commission that's deducted by the DMV, which goes towards funding the DMV operations. One other item I would mention is that there is a county optional sales tax, which would apply to the EV or a hybrid upon purchase. And that, with respect to Washoe County, again, goes to the RTC, and I believe that's divided between transit and road construction and maintenance. This study also involved interviewing 9 legislators whose districts represent a portion of Washoe County, and they were interviewed to gain insight on their perspective. And generally speaking, the legislators understood the impact of EVs and hybrids on fuel tax collections. And they were also open to implementing a policy solution to replace fuel tax in Washoe County. I would also add that the legislators were also mindful of the benefits that electric vehicles and hybrids present in terms of clean air standards the state is trying to achieve. So the policy interventions, NCL touched on this a little bit earlier, involve additional registration fees on electric vehicles and hybrids, the vehicle miles travel tax, and the electric charging station tax. This next slide highlights those states that have implemented additional registration fees. At the time this report was prepared, there were 39 states that had implemented the additional registration fee. There are now 41 states with the addition of Delaware and Rhode Island with respect to electric vehicles, and there are 4 western states that have not implemented the additional registration fee on EVs, which includes Nevada. And in looking at the policies implemented by other states, it largely appears that those states add the registration fee on EVs in addition to the registration fee that's already in place. So in the case of Nevada, that would be $33 for each vehicle. The fees that are applied to EVs, this highlights how those range from $50 to $250 throughout the country. Those with the darker purple are states that impose a fee of about $250. And then, of course, the gray states are those that have not implemented the additional registration fee. Some of the pros that go along with the additional registration fee is that it includes a policy that's straightforward, and due to the ease of implementation and administration, and it is familiar with the public, since the members of the public already pay the registration fee to the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's the $33 piece. And of course, it would likely require less cost to implement and administer, since it's not a brand new program. The DMV currently collects the registration fee. This would be a new registration fee if it were implemented on electric vehicles and hybrids. The cons to this proposal or policy intervention would be potential resentment on the part of EV owners and those who perceive they're being penalized. Of course, if the registration fee were set at a high amount, that could disincentivize EV ownership. And then the policy intervention does not address the impact of improved fuel-efficient vehicles, which is also a cause of the decline in sales of gallons of sales of gasoline. The next policy intervention involves the vehicle miles travel tax, otherwise known as the VMT. This represents a charge drivers pay per mile when they drive on public roads. It's currently implemented in Utah, Oregon, Virginia, and Hawaii. Hawaii most recently implementing this in 2025. Drivers of EVs have the option of paying the flat fee each year or enroll in the VMT program and pay a per mile fee up to the flat fee amount, which you heard a little bit of what some of those fees are from the NCSL presentation. Although the VMT is not fully implemented, of course, Nevada collects the vehicle miles traveled under a pilot program passed by the legislature in 2019. And I would just add that this is a self-reporting program where drivers report their odometer reading at the time they register. I recently registered a vehicle online in Nevada, and I noted that the emission station collects the odometer reading at the time I had the emission test on the vehicle prior to registration, and that information was already inputted in the DMV's system when I registered online. So, but however, the emission stations and those tests only apply in Washoe and Clark counties. The pros to the VMT tax: it ties road usage to the amount of taxes paid. It's more effective in measuring and taxing road use by EVs and hybrids or HEVs, and it could be structured to address vehicles with improved fuel efficiency. One of the cons would be the greater time and cost to implement, and it would be a new program to a large degree. One of the things I would note in our research is that the states that have implemented this use third-party vendors to assist in administering the program. Lastly, the electric charging station tax. Again, the map displaying those states that have implemented the electric charging station tax. Georgia, I believe, has since implemented this. Their program was on hold for a period of time. And as you heard from NCSL, Nebraska and Minnesota have implemented programs, although they've been enacted in statute, they have not fully gone into effect yet. One of the pros to the electric charging station tax is that it offers an alternative policy options for states to recover funding from EVs and hybrids. I would note that the state of Utah has implemented all three of these policy measures: the registration fee, the VMT, and the electric vehicle charging tax. It is difficult potentially to estimate the revenue that could be generated from the program, given the lack of information on kilowatt hours dispensed and the number of charging stations. We reached out to the Public Utilities Commission during the time the study was being researched, and there was not any information on the number of public charging stations out there or how much kilowatt hours those public charging stations dispensed. One of the other items I would note from our study was that some of the states have delayed implementation of the program for charging stations that are already in place due to the fact that those owners of those charging stations have had to add meters to measure the kilowatt hours that are dispensed from those. And then lastly, it requires additional time and cost to set this tax up. As part of the scope of work in our work for the RTC under the contract, we also looked at existing statutory authority to determine whether there were any potential solutions to generate additional revenue for road construction and maintenance. One of those is the Supplemental Governmental Services Tax. That is in place in statute but is not implemented in Washoe County at present. It is implemented in Clark County and Churchill County. And this is 1 cent on the dollar valuation of a vehicle. Currently, the basic governmental services tax, which is in place in Washoe County, is 4 cents on each dollar valuation of the vehicle. And I would add that that's implemented throughout the state, except for those vehicles that are exempt under statute. This policy measure would require approval by the Washoe County Board of Commissioners, but not approval of the voters, as is in the case for the other counties. A county is required to use the proceeds to pay for the cost of construction and maintenance of sidewalks and streets. The county may expend the proceeds of the tax under an interlocal agreement concerning any projects to be financed with the tax or the operating costs of a county, and it would require motor vehicles in the county, including EVs and HEVs, to pay the tax, except exempted vehicles. This next slide just displays what the cost might be for supplemental governmental services tax for a vehicle that has a value of $30,000. Currently, if the vehicle were depreciated by 15%, which is 2 years old, that vehicle owner would pay $357 of basic governmental services tax and $89 of supplemental governmental services tax if that tax were implemented. We would also note that existing statute provides for the county optional sales tax. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the RTC, the portion that they collect that's collected now is divided between transit and road construction. Currently, the county collects 3/8% under statute. 1/2 of 1% is authorized. Therefore, an additional 1/8 of 1% of this tax could be imposed. This tax does require a vote of the people in the general election, those voters in Washoe County. And we generally estimated that this 1/8 of 1% in county sales tax could generate approximately $14.6 million each year. I would note with both the supplemental governmental services tax and the county optional sales tax, both of those ideas do not specifically address the issue of EVs and hybrid vehicles using the roads and not paying gas taxes currently, or paying a lesser amount. So in our report, we used 5 factors to evaluate each of these policy options: the timeliness of implementation, the cost of implementation, revenue generation aspects of the policy intervention, the environmental effects, and the equity among taxpayers. And based on those factors, suggested the registration fee may be the best option to pursue. And of course, each of these policy interventions we discussed, the registration fee, the VMT, and the electric charging station tax, require approval by the state legislature. And that concludes my presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you so much for the presentation. Members, any questions for the Gwynn Center? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. We'll now move to the next item on our agenda, which is agenda item number 7, presentation on research and modeling of electric vehicle fee structures. We have folks joining us with Accretive Consulting and CDM Smith. We'll give you a moment to get everything set up, but welcome. Whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Good morning. Check in to make sure it's still good morning. It says Cami Dempsey. I'm president of Accretive Consulting, and to my right, your left, is Travis Dunn, the traffic guru from CDM Smith, and we are consultants to NDOT, as you heard earlier. It was already mentioned that in 2019 and also in 2021, there was, oh, sorry, I skipped that. The agenda for today is the Advisory Working Group on Sustainable Transportation Funding, where we'll talk a little bit about the legislation that brought us to the table. And then Travis will, of course, be going over the recommendations, the transportation funding tools, and electric vehicle fee structures, which you've already heard much about. So the Advisory Working Group was established by a piece of legislation in the 2021 session that created a group of diverse individuals throughout the entire state to look at sustainable funding mechanisms, what we can change, the equitable use of those, and how it would be implemented. So there was representatives from Growth and Infrastructure Committee members. We had former Senator Dallas Harris and also Assembly Member Danielle Monroe Moreno, who were our legislative counterparts. But we also had a lot of the transportation organizations from North, South, and some of the regional groups, local labor, gaming interests, clean energy, tax policy experts, and of course, even Indian tribes were included in that legislation. From there, we did meet throughout the end of 2021 and into 2022 interim, where the group evaluated much of the opportunities that were available to us and looking at what CDM Smith was providing to us on a national basis of trends. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Travis so he can talk to you about those recommendations.
Thank you, Cami. Good morning, Chair Watts and members. Travis Dunn from CDM Smith. As Cami mentioned, the Advisory Working Group started its effort by laying out an objective, which in this case was long-term sustainable funding for transportation in Nevada. And then to guide that work, 6 guiding principles, and we measured each of the potential revenue sources against the principles of sufficiency, user equity, meaning pay for what you use, social equity, flexibility to spend revenues on various modes of transportation, not just those restricted by the Constitution to highway purposes, the ability to align revenue sources with the state's goals related to reducing emissions, and then finally the transparency of the mechanism itself and its ease of implementation and compliance by taxpayers. A lot of mechanisms were examined by the Advisory Working Group. This is actually just a snapshot of the 25 that we did a medium level analysis of. I like to think about the big ticket transportation funding mechanisms as fuel, vehicles, and usage. And then within each of those 3 categories, there's a lot of variations on how you can instrument a tax or a fee to generate funding. So for example, there are a lot of different variables you can use to tax a vehicle. Its weight, its value, its miles per gallon, for example. So all of these mechanisms were examined along with a category of miscellaneous or other mechanisms, some of which you heard about earlier today. If you'd like to read the full report, there's a QR code here. It's very lengthy. It goes through all the deliberations and analysis that the working group went through. There were 4 primary recommendations. I will go into a little bit of detail on number 1 and number 3. The first recommendation was to institute a mileage-based parity fee on zero-emission vehicles, meaning electric and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. And second, sorry, get back up.
Oh, sorry.
Second is to work toward replacing the state fuel tax with a mileage-based parity fee for new vehicles by 2035. Third, because those first 2 recommendations are long-term recommendations, for any revenue needs in the nearer term, to focus on the existing revenue mechanisms the state already has to increase tax rates from those existing sources. And then fourth, for the transportation agencies in Nevada to regularly assess their needs and communicate those needs to elected officials. The concept of a mileage-based parity fee for zero-emission vehicles was actually broken down further into 3 steps. The first was to start with a simple flat annual parity fee for zero-emission vehicles. And then as the DMV became capable to implement a mileage-based parity fee, because it became clear through the deliberations of the working group that they would not be ready to do it right away, it would take some time. So using a flat fee in the meantime. And then once a mileage-based fee became available, allowing customers to choose, as you've seen other states have done, between a flat fee or a mileage-based fee. And then finally leveraging those odometer readings that DMV is already collecting as a way to help operate the program cost efficiently. On recommendation number 3, which was more about near-term potential revenue sources to address near-term needs, there were 5 recommendations, 2 of which the legislature has since acted on. That very bottom one was enacted in 2023 when the legislature directed 100% of the state's share of GST back to the State Highway Fund. And in 2025, of course, the legislature gave the Clark County Commission the ability to extend fuel revenue indexing in Clark County. I will zip through the next section because you've seen these maps already, but I will start with a little bit of framing. Of course, the problem that's been articulated today by several presenters is declining fuel consumption because of increasing adoption of fuel-efficient and electric vehicles, as well as cost inflation on the cost side of the equation for transportation agencies. Nevada is the number 4 ranked state, or was in 2025, for new sales of electric vehicles. Over 17% of new vehicles sold through September. So we expect a dip after that federal tax credit expired. But through September of last year, 17% of new cars sold here were electric. And also about 4% of all cars on the road in Nevada are electric or plug-in hybrid electric. This problem is not a surprise from a funding perspective. It was predicted decades ago. In fact, there were 2 federal commissions that looked at funding alternatives for the Federal Highway Trust Fund as early as 2007. And states have only really been experimenting with solutions to this problem of systemically declining revenues for about a decade. And so you've seen and heard all the solutions talked about today. 41 states have increased their gas tax this century. Go quickly here. 25 index their state gas tax to inflation. Of course, Nevada has indexing for the counties. Somewhere around 10, I've seen different numbers today, have electric vehicle charging station taxes. I'll note here to some of the questions from earlier, Utah's is structured as a sales tax. The others are structured as an excise tax. And in some cases, it's paid directly by the customer. In some cases, it's paid by the utility. For example, in Montana, the utility pays the tax for all of the electricity that supplies a charging site. So that wouldn't include just the electricity going into the vehicle, but also the ancillary infrastructure, for example, the lighting at the charging location. So depending on how precise you want to get to taxing just the kilowatt hour going into the vehicle, there's different ways to structure this type of a tax. And I'll also note Pennsylvania had a kilowatt hour tax that was based on self-reporting. So if you had an EV, you were supposed to file a tax return every month that declared how many kilowatt hours you used, pay a tax. Apparently most people either didn't know they were supposed to do that or chose not to. And so Pennsylvania repealed that law and in favor of a flat EV tax, which now we have 41 states with those EV fees, of which 33 also tax the plug-in hybrid electrics, and 17 or so also charge hybrids. The hybrids are always lower than the amount charged by the EVs. The amount by which it's lower depends on the state. 6 of these 17 states have chosen a 50% discount. And then lastly, of course, the 4 states that have been mentioned today that have per mile road usage charge programs are Oregon, Utah, Virginia, and Hawaii. The 5th state, Vermont, will come online next January. It was mentioned earlier, Utah is the one state on the map that has all 4 of these. And it's interesting the legislative history that got Utah to where they are today. And I'll briefly contrast. In 2020, Virginia enacted a comprehensive piece of transportation funding reform in their state legislature that included indexing the gas tax, implementing electric vehicle fees, implementing MPG-based flat fees for any fuel-efficient vehicle over 25 miles per gallon, indexing everything, and also offering a per mile road usage charge was one piece of comprehensive legislation. So this could be seen as an attempt to address the sustainable funding challenge in one fell swoop. By contrast, you see other states, Washington might be an example where because of the declining revenues, the funding is addressed every biennium through the budgetary process of increasing certain vehicle taxes or increasing the fuel tax a few pennies, or coming up with new mechanisms like those you've seen talked about today, like retail delivery fees. Utah, however, it stands out because it's an example where they have experimented over the last 10 years with a variety of different mechanisms. And really what has emerged is a policy of indexing the fuel tax to inflation, imposing additional vehicle fees on EVs, hybrids, and plug-in hybrids, and indexing all of the vehicle registration fees, imposing a sales tax on public EV charging, and then offering a per mile road usage charge as an option to those EV owners who don't wish to pay the flat fee. I'll finish with a little bit more detail on the EV fee structures. So go back to this map. If you were to look at, just pick a state at random on this map, chances are it would have a round number, either end in a 0 or a 5. And that's because it's not really scientific how these states have come up with the EV fee amounts. In fact, if you look at each state one by one and do the math of whether or not the EV fee that was chosen actually represents what the average gas vehicle pays in that state, in-state gas taxes, you'll find that most states are a little bit off the mark. So yeah, go to the next slide. So about 18 of these states charge more in EV fees than what the equivalent vehicle that's gas powered, average gas vehicle, should be paying in state gas taxes by an average of $50 more. 19 states charge less by an average of $66 less. And only 4 states did the math and charge an EV fee that equates to what the average vehicle in their state pays in state gas taxes. So I'll zoom in a little bit and do just a brief case study on 4 of these. First is California, which of course is known for having one of the highest gas taxes in the country. A typical gas vehicle in California pays about $300 per year in state of California gas taxes. But when the EV surcharge was enacted in 2017, the number chosen was $100, and it was indexed to inflation. So today it's $118. Why did they choose $100 instead of $300? I really don't know the answer to that question. I think the legislative history would probably reveal a story. My guess is that when you're trying to get a policy like this started, they picked a small round number that was easy to work with. And there are also some considerations about perhaps ensuring that the EVs would not be disadvantaged relative to, for example, a hybrid vehicle. A hybrid vehicle might pay a lot less than $300 in state gas taxes. Texas is a contrasting choice. A typical vehicle in Texas pays a little over $100 in state gas taxes. Texas chose as its EV fee $200. And the logic, the legislative history there is very clear. They were also capturing the portion of the federal gas tax that EVs aren't paying in Texas. So by capturing that and keeping that for the state highway fund in Texas, they ended up with a fee of $200. Kentucky did the math, apparently. Typical gas vehicle in Kentucky pays about $126 in state gas taxes, and lo and behold, their EV fee is $126. So what would it look like for Nevada if you were to follow the Kentucky model of doing the math for an average vehicle? First, I want to point out there are many layers to the fuel tax in Nevada that most states don't have, so it's more sophisticated here. But if you break it down component by component, the state gas tax, the portion that is imposed by the state, would generate in a par amount for an electric vehicle about $108 in fee. The federal component equates to about $83. In Washoe County, the component, the Washoe County tax and the cumulative fuel revenue indexing in Washoe County would generate about $284. In Clark County, it would be $163. And then for the other counties, which either have 5 or 10 cents of county fuel tax, it would be between $23 or $45. So for example, a vehicle in Washoe, if you were to have an EV fee that captured all components of the gas tax that are paid in Washoe County, the state, the federal, and the county component, the average gas-powered vehicle is paying about $475 in all-in fuel taxes. In Clark County, it's about $350. So lastly, on the right-hand side, if you were to imagine imposing all of these components statewide, the revenue generated, we estimate, would be a little over $80 million in 2028, growing swiftly because of a few assumptions. First of all, we assume the fees would be indexed to inflation, like the fuel tax is. And second, we assume a fairly moderate rate of EV and hybrid vehicle adoption in Nevada. And thirdly, we assume that this fee would also be applied to hybrids with a 50% discount, as other states have done. So by 2050, this revenue mechanism would generate about $1.6 billion per year. And if you can see the color split, a little less than half would be dedicated to the state highway fund, that's the state portion, and the rest would be dedicated to the respective counties. Thank you for your attention. We're happy to take any questions that you might have.
All right, thank you very much for that presentation. We'll open it up for questions. We'll begin with Vice Chair Nguyen.
Thank you for that presentation. You answered a bunch of the questions I had leading into it. When you talk about the increase in that, do you have a corresponding chart that shows the decrease in like fuel tax? That like, is there something you can overlay with that? Like, do they offset each other, or how does that work?
Travis.
I'm assuming the cars will also, in addition, I mean, we've seen it, they've become more efficient anyway, even if they're not hybrids or electric vehicles.
Thank you for the question, Senator Nguyen. Travis Dunn, CDM Smith. We can certainly share that information with you. We do have forecasts of fuel tax receipts. It would be offset by a corresponding amount of what you saw in that chart and more, because the fee assumption doesn't capture conventional vehicles that are growing more fuel efficient. And for at least the next decade or so, most of the erosion in fuel tax is actually coming from improvements in vehicle fuel economy of conventional vehicles. And so capturing the electric vehicle portion and the hybrid vehicle portion solves that part of the problem, captures that portion of the fuel tax that's being eroded, but it doesn't necessarily address the share of revenue that's being lost as fuel efficiency in general improves.
Do you have any concerns? Like, what is a more, based on the study that you did, what is the more sustainable version, to go to vehicle miles traveled for all vehicles, like transitioning to that, or to do this weird, you know, as electric vehicles go up, it goes down? Like, is there any one that is more, I guess, sustainable?
Senator Nguyen, Travis Dunn, CDM Smith for the record. Certainly there's a lot of policy choices before you. I think our analysis would suggest that if your objective is purely to offset the revenue, the flat fee approach and a per mile fee approach would generate roughly the same revenue, provided you're applying them to the same classes of vehicles. So from a revenue perspective, you can get there either pathway. The other considerations that might drive you to choose one over the other are some of those other guiding principles that the working group took into consideration, like user equity, ease of compliance, transparency, those sorts of factors. That might be the way to tilt the opinion in one direction or the other.
I'm sorry, Chair, may I ask a couple of follow-up? When you were taking into consideration some of those other models in other states that you were looking at, some of those states that I saw in there just right off the bat, I know have like more extensive public transit like options. So how does that work in our state if we are not having, I mean, we don't have those options. So I feel like we're very heavily reliant on like vehicles at this point. So I mean, was that any kind of consideration in the study and then some of the determinations on I guess the sustainability of these funding mechanisms moving forward?
Travis Dunn, CDM Smith. Perhaps I could ask you to clarify the question, but I think maybe it was about whether drivers have options besides driving to avoid these additional fees.
Yeah, I guess it kind of, to a certain extent, it feels like we're comparing apples and oranges because some of the other states that we're looking at don't have the same public transit infrastructure that we have in our state. So I was wondering what kind of consideration these other states' models had in, or are you just presenting it? This is the other state, this is what they have. In Oregon, for example, and I know if I go to Oregon, they have a light rail system everywhere. So I'm curious on that.
Okay. Travis Dunn, CDM Smith. Maybe I'll just use Oregon as a case study to provide an answer, and I'm happy to follow up if I don't quite get it. Oregon does have an extensive light rail transit system in the Portland metropolitan area. It's primarily funded by local taxes in the Portland metro, as well as a payroll tax that's assessed in the service area of the transit system. However, Oregon, like Nevada, has a constitutional provision that requires motor fuel taxes and vehicle fees to be dedicated strictly to highway purposes. So none of these revenue mechanisms in Oregon are able to be flexed to transit purposes. In fact, that's the case for many of the states in the Western US. So the transit funding model that states have pursued actually is not a state model, it's a local model. So they rely on sales taxes or local fees. Washington State's another example where a lot of the funding for the Seattle area transit comes from motor vehicle excise tax, which is similar to the GST in the service region of the transit provider. By contrast, the state funding is almost entirely for highways.
Oh, no, I think that's helpful. I guess I'm just curious is, let's say we were to add a light rail here in Southern Nevada, you're still going to need the funding for those roads because whether or not there's 100 cars on that road or 100,000 cars on that road, you still need to build those roads out. So I was more, and yes, I am totally fleshing out my question in this rambling, question statement here. But I guess that's my concern is as we are looking at this, the costs of repairing our roads are going to continue to go up despite increased public transit like light rail or EVs are more efficient. So I'm wondering which of these models, in your opinion, I guess, would allow us to increase the funding for roads that are going to be necessary no matter what?
Travis Dunn, CDM Smith. I don't want to express an opinion per se, but I will add or offer that.
What does the evidence show from your study, I guess?
I think for a highway system, it's one of those rare areas of a public good provided by government that is capable of being sustained more or less as an enterprise through user funding, whether that is vehicle fees, usage fees, fuel taxes. Many states have tolls. In general, there's a tax principle called non-discrimination, where you want to tax at a level that generates enough revenue to pay for the service, but without disrupting the underlying economic activity that you're taxing. So although fuel taxes and vehicle fees certainly give residents sticker shock at times, as a proportion of the total cost of driving, taxes and fees is very low. It's less than 10%. So it's possible to fund a highway system, putting aside transit, on the backs of the users, frankly, at a rate that is a very small percentage of the total cost of driving. And that allows you to segregate how you fund it from the general fund, for example, that's funded by other resources that address other state priorities.
And thank you for your patience as I bumbled my way through that long statement and question. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you. There's a lot of options and a lot of complexity. I know, one of the issues that was brought up is efficiency. There's a concept of being able to index for efficiency as well, but it's yet another factor that has to get kind of built into to formulas. But I think at a minimum, indexing to inflation is a long-standing practice for many different things that helps at least ensure that inflation is not constantly eroding revenues. Without creating some indexing mechanism, it constantly comes back to decision makers, whether that is elected officials or the voters, to have to affirmatively increase things to catch up. And there is a alarming amount of failing to do that. And the longer that we don't do that, the bigger a jump we have to make, the more difficult that is for everybody to address. And again, I think, that is kind of, I think the term sticker shock came up. That's a major issue. And I do think that some of the states that have implemented some of these EV fees or charges have had them lower because of that issue of sticker shock. And so, but again, without some sort of adjustment mechanism, they're going to be back in the same situation sooner rather than later. I think the one thing I would say is that while I appreciate your comments about kind of the total cost of driving, again, we do have fairly large registration fees when you consider the GST. And while this is not the revenue committee, I do think it's important to note it's funding local government, it's funding education. Those are things that other states fund with an income tax. They have property tax systems that bring in adequate revenue to fund that. So those are not costs that are then transferred onto a surcharge on vehicle registration. So when people feel the pinch of the overall bill, the registration fee itself might be low, but there are reasons why the total sum is pretty high. So members, other questions? All right. Thank you very much for your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our last item on the agenda is public comment. I will just very quickly say as we close out, we heard about the substantial needs that our community has, about the desire that we are hearing from residents to improve our transportation system, both our roadways, our railways, our mass transit, and how the current system to bring in resources for that is not up to the task. We heard about a large range of options that we can look at to try and address that issue. It was mentioned some of the committees and studies that were brought forward since at least 2019, which is when I entered the legislature. In 2019, I thought that those would lead to policy solutions within the next 2 years, and here we are today. We are, as was stated earlier, are running out of road to kick the can down. So it is absolutely time for us to take action. We are not going to solve this issue overnight, but we absolutely need to do something, or else we are going to really severely degrade the quality of life for people across the state who depend on transportation to get to work, to get their groceries, to get to their health care, and to get home. So we will be continuing to have conversations with the folks that presented today and others to figure out what is a next step. And I think you've heard about electric vehicles quite a bit. So we are going to be working to figure out what we can do to start getting us on a road to more sufficient funding for our transportation moving forward. So thank you all to everyone who presented today. We will now move on to the last item on our agenda, which is public comment. Again, we'll be limiting public comment to 2 minutes. For anyone who would like to speak, please come forward in Las Vegas, in Carson City, and if anyone would like to provide public comment by phone, please dial in now. We will start here in Las Vegas. Welcome back, sir.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee. I'm Michael Covington from Las Vegas, just a resident here. I've listened today as we've all talked about how tight the highway funds are, how flat the revenues are, and the struggle to cover the deferred maintenance without burdens on the taxpayers. Passenger rails along the I-15 could help that exact pressure. Studies show that 60 to 70% of new rail riders switch from driving their cars, meaning thousands fewer vehicles pounding on our pavements every day, fewer crashes to fix, and less immediate wear starting as soon as they launch. Cities adding rail lines see about 7% less congestion on average, smoother traffic and trucks for trucks and everyone else, cutting daily repair down and delay costs right away. Over time, without good transit operation, peak hour delays can jump up to 47% in some corridors, piling on billions in extra road damages and maintenances we already can't afford. Rails help prevent that spike, preventing what we have and stretching every dollar longer. Look at the Bright Line West project. It's projected to move millions of cars from the I-15, reducing congestion and road strain without new taxes. Similar services north could bring statewide savings. With budgets as tight as they already are, why chase only new fees when passenger rails pulling cars or could be pulling cars off the highways, delivering quick relief on repairs today and real lasting savings for tomorrow? I'd love to hear your thoughts on exploring the I-15 corridors. Thank you for your guys' time. Also, I did send in one more handout if you guys got that as well.
Thank you. We will make sure that that gets distributed to all of the members. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing nobody else coming forward in Las Vegas at this time and seeing nobody in Carson City, AVH, would anyone like to provide public comment by phone?
Chair, your public line is open and working, but you have no callers at this time.
All right, thank you, members. That concludes our agenda for today. Our next meeting will be a joint meeting with the Committee on Natural Resources. That will be on March 25th and will be focused on issues related to data centers. With that, thank you all for your time. This meeting is adjourned.